Thank you, Simon and Robert, for coming on my podcast. I am very excited for the conversation we're going to have today.
Fatty meat, ribeye steak, oh my God, it's heaven. When you realize you can eat it with joy and know that it's the healthiest thing for you.
But people want to hear that. So that's why people are gravitating to you.
They
You're
gravitate to
charismatic
you.
and you're telling people that their favorite foods that are rich in butter and high in animal protein that they thought were unhealthy, all of a sudden they're healthy.
Prove it.
People don't really want to eat salads, I think. That was Simon Hill and Dr. Robert Kiltz, two passionate experts with polarizing views on nutrition.
What if there's a different story?
I have a problem with this idea of not trusting the science, but then thinking people on social media are somehow going to do a better job at getting to the truth.
Simon Hill is a physiotherapist and nutrition scientist and host of The Proof podcast. With a best-selling book, The Proof is in the Plants.
Increasing fiber and whole grain intake. Across the board, unanimous. 135 million plus people of follow-up data shows a reduction in risk of colorectal cancer. Why does that data exist, yet you take a different position?
Dr. Robert Kiltz is a diplomat of the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. He is the founder of CNY Fertility and a thought leader in the keto carnivore movement.
Every scientific paper is a story. Science is very biased. Plants are basically carbohydrates. It doesn't matter if you're a potato, tomato, or kale, or spinach, because they all break down to simple sugars in the
So
gut.
you're equating a black bean to a jelly bean. But what I'm hearing from you is they both contain carbohydrates, and at the end of the day, those carbohydrates are toxic.
As I look more and more at poisoning from plants, I believe that they're probably the leading cause of most of our diseases.
So you think fiber is
bad for you? It's absolutely bad. Fiber is one of the leading causes of colon cancer, and I will bet $1 billion on it. It's meant for a baby.
Fear is such a problem, and then you're coming out and saying dairy is
deadly. So
Are you
it's
not
like you
contributing
say.
to the fear?
Okay, so what do you believe is the best form of evidence? Narrow down if you guys agree on any level.
I don't know that we're going to disagree. I'm not saying that yet.
Which brings me back to my earlier point.
Disagree.
I would push back and say, show me the health outcome data.
I'm going to disagree. Sugars entering the bloodstream fast is better than slow.
I'd push back and say, let's look at the average person's diet.
I'm going to
and make it
disagree
really
with
clear
you,
that's
but
not
I'm just
true.
giving you the
Yeah,
story
let's
that
hear your
I
whole
know.
story. Then
And I'll push back a little bit on that, if I may.
Robert and Simon have very different perspectives on the hierarchy of evidence. Will they be able to see eye to eye on anything? Welcome to the Ellen Fisher Podcast. Thank you, Simon and Robert, for coming on my podcast. I am very excited for the conversation we're going to have today. So the first one I wanted to ask, just to set the framework here, is if you could both share your dietary thesis and philosophy on what the optimal diet is for human health to prevent disease as best we can and promote longevity. Why don't you go first?
Well, as a physician and a human being like all of us, I'm not sure I know the proper diet for all of us. But as a physician, where I learned basically mostly a Mediterranean plant-based diet with low fat was the diet that was best for us. And yet I suffered for years with dyslexia, depression, anxiety, migraines. And as a child, I had severe migraines, severe stomach and bowel problems. And over the years, I tried every diet imaginable, mostly plant-based, never went mostly meat-based, never read that or thought that would be the optimal. And after I found paleo, mostly a ancestral diet with fatty meat and some plant-based in that, I got better. But it was when I found carnivore, when I nearly eliminated all plants to my diet, that I found that carnivore fatty meat was the most optimal for myself. I wasn't really teaching it to my clients, patients, or anyone, and I wasn't podcasting, but over the years, I found that many of my patients and just people I meet that have gone carnivore have eliminated or significantly reduced the diseases they've been suffering from. And we're all suffering, and that's one of the biggest problems. Cancer, stroke, diabetes. My sister died of diabetes. Good friends have died of cancer. So I believe that a meat-centric diet and fatty meat is probably the best for all of us. But for each their own to find their way to figure this out. Whether or not it prevents disease or it enables us to live longer, we have not proven that. But I do feel that it significantly reduces the diseases we're suffering from.
Cool. So my kind of on-ramp to this goes back to when I was a kid and I was 15. I'll cut a long story very short. But it was a seed that was planted that kind of set me on this journey of science and just being curious. I think you mentioned off air, being curious. You know, it's kind of my life mantra. My dad is a professor, physiologist, and is, publishing on cardiovascular disease risk factors. And so I grew up in a household where there was scientific studies, littered around the house and scribbled on and highlighted. And I never knew what any of these things meant, but what I did understand was that science was a really cool tool, important tool for humanity to better understand the world and kind of test our intuition or test our hypotheses. So I had this exposure to science from a very early age. And when I was 15, my dad and I used to drive out and visit wineries. This is in the outskirts of Melbourne, in a place called Yarra Valley. And we're driving along, and my dad had an old MGB, those British convertibles.
Yeah.
And he started to develop chest pain. And I could tell he was uncomfortable. He said to me, I'm getting this pain in my chest and shoulder. I think it's okay. We went home, proceeded to have dinner. The pain got worse and worse. And eventually, in the middle of the night, I woke up to noise in the kitchen, and my dad was having a major heart attack. And so called 000, which is 911 in America. And we were in a remote location in the country, and they sent a helicopter, and modern medicine thankfully saved his life. And in the aftermath of that, the next day, there was like a family meeting with the cardiologist, and the cardiologist sort of sat my brother down and myself and said, look, cardiovascular disease runs in families. And so you guys, you're young adults, you'll need to be screened and be careful of this as you're aging. And the conversation sort of ended there. That's somewhat of a kind of a limiting belief to then carry as a kid, because it felt like to me that my health fate was going to be determined by my genes. And my dad on the outside, he actually looked like a sort of middle-aged, healthy Australian man. He exercised, he ate fairly well, not perfectly. He was overworked like most young dads, and carried a bit of stress, but he wasn't on a whole slew of medications and didn't see any of this coming. So I had no reason to kind of believe that my health trajectory would be any different. Until a number of years later, when I went to university, I did an undergraduate in science, and I did a master's in nutrition science. And it became increasingly clear to me that while our genetics predispose us, certainly, to certain diseases, the lifestyle choices that we're making, particularly nutrition, affects how our genes are expressed and our risk of chronic diseases. And I think that the main thing that Dr. Kiltz and I will share is our passion for helping improve cardiometabolic health, metabolic health at a population level. We may butt heads at how we do that, but I think we agree that the current state of health is not ideal. And over the years that I was, getting more and more familiar with the research, and your anecdote is a really important anecdote. But I think something that I would put out at the beginning of this conversation for us to explore is that there are anecdotes everywhere. And so I got exposed to very similar anecdotes from people like Caldwell Esselstyn doing hardcore vegan diets. And then there's anecdotes from people doing macrobiotic diets, low fat, high fat. And so with all of these anecdotes that are out there, how do you sort of come to some type of truth or move closer to a truth as to what is an optimal diet? And that's where I believe the anecdotes are interesting and they're very hypothesis generating, but you need to come back to the science and data and look for trends and patterns and converging lines of evidence across different types of studies to get a proper feel for what optimal is. And that's another term that we'll need to define in this, because it might be that our definition of optimal is different. Yeah. My definition of optimal, and the way, I think of my communication of science and helping people as kind of, there's an art form to it. It's how are you optimizing for that person to be healthy and vital today, to do the things that they want to do at whatever age they're at, and also age well and reduce their risk of pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, these things. And that can be a little bit of a juggling act. In short, my view from a dietary perspective is that there is no single optimal diet for longevity. So I think we maybe are aligned on that. But I do think there is a theme. And I think that when you do look at the different types of evidence, observational studies, clinical trials, that theme becomes obvious, and you consistently see good outcomes for cardiometabolic disease. And that is diets that are high in fiber. They are low in refined carbohydrates, contain a good amount of unrefined carbohydrates. They're not low fat. Dr. Kiltz mentioned he was adopting a low-fat diet. I think some of the messaging around low-fat diets over the years, it has confused people, and our understanding of fat has evolved. And I'm not sure if Ansel Keys will come up in this conversation, but some of the 1980s messaging around low-fat, I think, confused people. The quality of the fat matters a lot, and we can dig into that. But diets that are high fiber, low in refined carbohydrates, have a good amount of unsaturated fats, so low in saturated fat and low in ultra-processed foods, and that could be omnivorous, it could be pescatarian, there's a number of ways to cut it. Those diets are associated with better long-term health outcomes.
And what do you think about that? All that he's had to say there.
Well, I'm a scientist, a mathematician. I went into medicine because I believe in science, and I was very scientific, dogmatic forever. And recently, American College of OBGYN came out with a consensus of a healthy diet for women lactating and breastfeeding. It was mostly plant-based. It included healthy fats, which I don't know what that is because we label things as good or bad, healthy or not, but those are opinions in so many ways. I believe fat is from an animal and oils are from plants. And the term healthy or not, that's where the debate is all about. And that's the beauty of all this. But ultimately, the cause of disease in science and medicine seems to be multifactorial, idiopathic, uncertain. But we can agree that sugars are probably part of the problem, refined sugars more so than others. I do believe that plants are basically carbohydrates, all plants. It doesn't matter if you're a potato, tomato, a kale, or spinach, because they all break down to simple sugars in the gut. And my sister died of diabetes. She had it since age 4. The question is, why did she get it? And that's the mystery. As I look more and more at the plants and poisoning from plants, I believe that they're probably the leading cause of most of our diseases because they contain a tremendous amount of plant sugars, plant antigens, lectins, oxalates, phytates.
What kind of plants are you talking about, though?
I'm talking about all plants, just all plants, because plants are live organisms and they don't want to be eaten, killed. And animals obviously are live organisms. They don't either. So no organism wants to be killed and eaten, but obviously we all must eat something in order to be alive. And so did we evolve eating mostly meat and then we ate some plants? I was never there. None of us were there, but certainly the scientific review of what we likely ate for many, many years was probably raw meat. For a long time, that's likely how we evolved. And then we began to eat some plants, and we probably ate some plants way back when we began as a human being. But I think that the plants, if you look at them, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, nicotine, caffeine, all come from plants. I don't know what toxic chemical comes from fatty meat. And we've vilified fat. And fat has been talked about as the cause of most disease. Saturated versus unsaturated, healthy oils versus unhealthy oils, which can be very confusing for most people who are trying to learn about health and wellness. And for most of us, like myself, I just want a simple story because the science can be very confusing. And I've written plenty of papers in my day in reproductive medicine. I read a lot of them, but they can be very confusing. And many of us are constantly arguing over which is the right side.
Right, but I don't you think as science communicators, rather than choosing a story that feels nice, it's our job to say, this is confusing, let's double click on it and explore the nuance and then work out how to communicate that to the public. Because that's certainly how I approach it. So like with your stance on fat, I think it is nuanced. I think the messaging around low fat is not a great message because there are different types of fats. But then I would challenge you and say that when we look at outcome data, which is what I care most about, not mechanisms, we can explore mechanisms, but on outcome data, whether saturated fat is good or bad depends on what someone is eating instead of. So when you look at replacement, you look at saturated fat, when people replace calories from saturated fat for refined carbohydrates, which often happens in the Western diet and certainly happened from 1980 because the messaging wasn't good enough. The messaging should have been, if you're going to cut your saturated fat, what are you going to eat instead?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm sorry. What is saturated fat?
Saturated fat is a type of fat in our body that doesn't have these double bonds like unsaturated fats.
But when you choose a food to eat, which one is it?
It's like myristic acid and stearic acid. So it's fats. There is not one type of saturated fat. Saturated fat is an umbrella term.
Right.
It even includes short chain fatty acids that our gut makes.
I think what I'm asking is, so for you to go to the market and buy food,
sure,
and we're communicating to a world that needs to understand simplicity.
Oh, we can bring it back to food. I was going to get there.
No, this is one of the things I think we need to look at much more, is because people are confused over cholesterol and triglycerides and saturated, unsaturated. And what I like to do is look at, when you go to the market, you don't need a label. You know what it is. It's so fat.
But we're going to disagree on the foods. So that's why it's important to first start with the nutrient and understand.
I don't know that we're going to disagree. I'm not saying that yet. We might agree on more than you know. Okay. And what I'm saying is that science is sometimes confused as what we're simply working to do, because you're in the nutritional field, I'm in the medical field. We often write papers and we have conversations because it has something to do with the need to publish, the prestige for all of us, or the money that is taken in order to write the papers or keep us wherever we're going. This is no accusation to you or anyone, just sort of a global look at it. What I've learned in medicine is that so much of what we get as science often has some propaganda in that it's hard for our communities to create some simplicity of, what do I eat?
I 100% agree that at the end of the day, when the dietary guidelines come out and are communicated at a population level, they need to be very simple, right? But I think what we're discussing today is, how do you arrive at what that plate looks like? And in order to do that, you need people that are educated in science to click on these areas of confusion that exist, because I'm sure your position, or at least what I understand, is that saturated fat is not a problem, right?
Animal fat, I believe, is not the cause of disease at all.
Okay.
So rather than calling it saturated fats, because it's the science of the bonds, and then you look at these long charts that try to tell you, well, which is the good one, which is the bad one, and it's very confusing for most humans to find what's the best way, because I see so many people suffering from infertility. In the foundation of life, fertility is it. But more and more men and women are suffering from being infertile, miscarriages, losses, birth defects, and many things, which I believe is secondary mostly to the food we eat, which contains a tremendous amount of sugars, a tremendous amount of chemicals that people even aren't aware of. Goitrogenic foods. Are you familiar with goitrogenic foods? Where do they come from?
Certain plant foods.
Many plant foods. Most of the plant foods we actually eat. Kale, asparagus, wheats, soy, go down the list. 99% of the plants.
Right, but anything can be toxic. The dose is what matters. Oxygen is toxic to us, can be toxic to us.
Of course.
But would you agree that we need air? Like, we need to breathe air. It sustains us. It's beneficial. So it's narrowing down a plant and saying that, okay, that plant contains this single compound. Therefore, when eaten as a whole, it's detrimental to your health. I would push back and say, show me the health outcome data. And earlier, your point about all these plants and the defense chemicals, and you believe that this is the explanation for poor cardiometabolic health and obesity and these things, I'd push back and say, let's look at the average person's diet. How much fruit and vegetables and legumes are they actually eating? 70% of the calories are coming from ultra-processed foods. It's hard to blame foods like kale and broccoli and asparagus and lettuce when people are not eating them.
I agree with you that it's hard to blame, but they are the leading cause of disease.
And how would you substantiate that? Based
Clinical
on what
practice.
evidence?
Okay, so getting things published is not very easy if it doesn't meet the standard appropriate acceptance of what is science. Because when you're talking about something opposite, carnivore is a very opposite idea. It's not very accepted in the medical field. I've already been reported to the medical licensing board of New York State, and my hospital came to me and said, Dr. Kiltz, you cannot talk about this. And I'm saying, well, okay. The guy was a diabetic without legs who was telling me this, a physician, a scientist, because we are very blind and biased against other opposite ideas. So,
but that doesn't prove your point.
I'm not trying to prove my point. I'm just having a discussion.
Because that affects everyone. We could have a vegan doctor here saying the same thing.
I love vegan doctors. Look, I'm not, whatever you choose to eat, but if we want to stand and get down to the science, first thing we need to do is let go of our biases, because our biases are big. I'm here because I want to learn more from you. I believe you have a lot to share. But I think that the nutritional sciences are highly biased because of where it all started. The Seventh-day Adventists, John Kellogg, and there are many others that are teaching mostly a plant-based diet. Plus, we're in a world of plant-based. Our religious and cultural biases. I'm Italian in my upbringing. Oh boy, I love the fruits and the vegetables. All these. I grew up in Silver Lake in LA. We had fruit trees everywhere. My daughter would die to a banana and avocado. More people are allergic to plants than they are to animals. We demify animals, which I think we just need to be open. Like, you can eat both. But when you have an illness, or there may be a risk of you getting an inflammatory disorder like cancer, like heart disease, like strokes, we want to learn more and be able to talk about this in a way that, yes, there are some people that are more allergic to some plants over others. Which are those that are less allergenic? What can you add to that diet that may be able to reduce inflammation even more? And I think adding more fat, animal fat, is really the best one.
Okay, so I want to ask you guys a question to narrow down like the direction of this conversation. This is super interesting. I love it. But I think this will help us get to a very specific topic right now. What do you believe is the best form of evidence? Let's talk about the hierarchy of evidence so we can narrow down, if you guys agree on any level, what's the best way to look at the evidence and figure out which one has more weight than others on optimal nutrition.
My grandmother. We used to eat a lot more fat in our diets than we don't today. A Mediterranean diet is basically a low animal fat diet. And our standard diets we're eating today, yes, there are processed foods, but one of my best friends died of cancer, and he ate a very healthy diet. He was a healthy, a strong doctor, very, very exercised a lot, great positivity in life. But when he died, Dave died of cancer, I was like, okay, why did that guy die? And so the evidence is in our conversations and things we share. This is where evidence comes from. It's not a scientific paper that someone gets published to prove things. The government and science and medicine, they're certainly looking for answers, but I hope that each of us can be a little questioning whether or not that's exact. But I would say our stories are one of the most important things we can do, because when you look at the Bible, it's stories. When you look at so much that people are reading about, people want to look at stories. And I've learned from people like yourselves that are blogging and sharing stories online more than anything. I just came from Montello, Wisconsin, for a meetup, MEAT up with Healing Humanity. And I visited with hundreds of people there that had simply lost all of their diseases, all of their suffering of drugs and medications by going carnivore, which would not have made sense to me 20 years ago, but it does today. And what I've learned is that the medical community was completely biased against it because the money comes to the medical communities. The American Heart Disease, the American Diabetic Association gets money so that it can support their foundations. And then they sell a label that says heart healthy on cereals, which is made up of primarily sugar. It breaks down to sugar in your gut. It may look nice on a plate, but basically in your gut, it digests down to only three things: amino acids, simple sugars, and fatty acids. And the majority of plants that we're eating have sugar. Nature's sugar. Nature makes sugar. And so what's the best evidence? Actually, these conversations. People are going to listen to this, and then they're going to make their minds up whether they want to be on the plant side or the animal side. But none of us know the answer.
My go-to brand for all things protein and creatine is Momentous. To help reach my daily protein target, I complement my diet with 1.5 scoops of Momentous's chocolate or vanilla chai plant-based protein for 30 grams of protein and all essential amino acids, which supports muscle growth, hormone and collagen production, skin health, and recovery. I also consume 10 grams of Momentous's creatine daily to enhance energy production, muscle strength, bone health, and cognition, with studies now showing the benefit of creatine on short-term memory and intelligence. I'll do anything for a little extra brain power. Both products are NSF certified for sport. This certification is the only third-party certification program trusted by the NBA, MLB, Ironman, etc. NSF certification means you can rest easy knowing you're actually getting what's on the label and nothing more. So if you're interested in making a true investment in your health, why not join the best in human performance and be a part of the change in raising the bar on supplements? Simply go to livemomentous.com and use the code LIVINGPROOF for 20% off your new routine today. That's livemomentous.com with the code LIVINGPROOF.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a very different view.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of false equivalence to say, hey, there's an anecdote here and there's an anecdote here, therefore we don't know. I think anecdotes are, for the most part, explainable, and often the stories that we're subject to are affected by enormous bias. And so the people that I get coming to my community, that there is a huge selection bias. People at conferences, massive selection bias. How do you know for every person that adopts the carnivore diet that gets this great result, how do you know how many people had equal and opposite result, had no result? Well, you don't until you capture that within a study. So it can be very easy to fall into this trap of hearing good story after good story and assuming that that is the typical, that is the average, that is the expected. You need the scientific method to actually be able to investigate that. I grant that at the anecdote story level, it's interesting. I don't think people should be shutting down conversation. I think people should be saying, hey, that's interesting, isn't it? But let's remember, that's an anecdote, and there are anecdotes all over the place. We can find someone who says just drinking green juice cured their cancer. Where does that leave us in terms of creating recommendations for people? We have to come back to some type of method to test our hypotheses. And more often than not, our hypotheses are wrong. We prove them as false. And so we use a scientific method to reduce our bias. And we look at different types of studies. We look at mechanistic studies. And Robert's spoken to some mechanisms already in this podcast. And I think mechanisms are interesting. That's often preclinical, lab-based research, looking at very isolated pathways. It's very reductionist, but it can be hypothesis generating. And then you go a step further and you look at observational large populations where you're trying to control for confounding variables and getting as best to look as possible at how different diet variables are affecting someone's health. And then you go to a clinical trial level, and there's going to be varying lengths of those. Some of the shorter ones, you're just looking at how dietary changes affect certain established risk factors like blood pressure or inflammation or ApoB. then you might have longer randomized controlled trials that are going for long enough to see hard health outcomes. What's the incidence of cancer during that trial or having a heart attack? And so the way that I'm trained, again, going back to when I was a child all the way through my scientific training to today, is to look for converging lines of evidence. Mechanisms are pointing in a certain way, observational evidence, and then supported and corroborated by clinical trials. And that to me is more objective and less subject to bias than listening to a story, as compelling as storytelling is. Storytelling is compelling, and I actually would push back and say, I think storytelling is why people are so confused, because it is so engaging and they're getting exposed to so many stories on from all these different diet tribes. And what's the commonality among many of these diet tribes? Like, why do a lot of people adopting a carnivore or even a vegan or some other variation of a diet achieve results, at least in the short term? They remove 70% of the calories that are ultra processed and often are losing weight. And I believe, based on the research, that one of, if not the most significant drivers of poor metabolic health is having excessive adiposity, fat levels, particularly when that fat gets inside the liver and the pancreas, ectopic fat. And so when you remove someone and take them off of a Western diet that's full of low protein, low fiber, low water, energy dense, hyperpalatable foods that are easy to overconsume and create an energy surplus and lead to weight gain, when you take them off of that diet into any number of diets, you can help restore metabolic health. The question then becomes, of those different variations, which variation is going to also help them reduce risk long-term the best? Granted that because they've lost weight, significant weight, with any of those types of diets, they've already reduced their risk of a lot of diseases. So I'm not here to argue that there's one way to kind of restore metabolic health in the short term. And I think if you look at low fat versus low carb diets and weight loss, it's very clear that there's no unanimous winner. I think low carb in the first 6 months tends to perform a little better, but by 1 to 2 years, there's no significant difference in terms of overall weight loss or what dietary pattern's best for restoring metabolic health. What I'm interested in is, what does the dietary pattern look like for not 2 years or 3 years, and not these individual stories we see, but 10, 20, 30 years down the track.
Our dietary advice is not working.
I agree.
Science,
I agree the dietary advice is not working.
And I will tell you that science is not working.
Can I ask you a question about the dietary advice?
Oh, please.
So is it the actual recommendations, or is it the fact that people cannot adhere to them that is the problem?
Well, the food we sell is highly addictive and not good for people. We know that. We know that the majority of the processed food, which is mostly sugar-laden, is the biggest culprit, because sugar is the major cause of a lot of our addictions and the diseases.
When you say sugar, what do you mean?
Well, plants are made from a combination of carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water. It's a long-chain carbon particle that comes together. And sugars, all plants basically are broken down to simple sugar, unless they're fiber, which are poorly digested in the human body, except the microbes like them in the human body. Microbes, bacteria and yeast, ferment plants, fiber in our gut, which makes heat, alcohol, aldehydes, and gas. Our children are walking around with alcohol in their bodies, and so are you likely, because fermentation in our gut is causing alcohol to be made. And it mostly happens in the colon.
So you think fiber is
bad for you? It's absolutely bad. Fiber is one of the leading causes of colon cancer, and I will bet $1 billion on this.
So why Andrew Reynolds, 2019, performs the largest systematic review of randomized controlled trials, observational studies, and increasing fiber and whole grain intake across the board, unanimous. This is 135 million plus people of follow-up data, shows a reduction in risk of colorectal cancer. The more fiber people eat, the more whole grains, the lower their risk of colorectal cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. Why does that data exist, yet you take a different position?
Colon cancer on the rise? In younger people, it's on the rise.
Sure. But there could be many explanations for that other than sugar.
Listen, everything's multifactorial. But the one thing I've learned more than anything, that by eliminating fiber in plants, I've seen so many people suddenly stop having bowel bleeding, stop having bladder bleeding, start feeling better. Okay. And this is across the board. Many people in the carnivore space are seeing this. Okay. So now if it's published, that means it's right. Well, publishing is supported by some money and all of us in what we do, but the pharmaceuticals, the food industry, many industries, I mean, this is the way we've been living for so long. But let's just keep the science.
When you say it's the way we've been living for so long, what do you mean by that?
Well, we've been eating a plant-based and a process-based diet for a long time, and we've been getting sicker and sicker and sicker. More people are infertile today.
But you don't think the quality of those plants matters? That's making up the calories in someone's diet?
Well, when you use the word quality, okay. So when you eat something, food, a plant, it is broken down between your teeth, and the enzymes and the digestive enzymes in the gut will basically make them into a process, simple sugars, amino acids, and fatty acids.
But that's not how it works. The digestion of food is fundamentally affected by the food matrix and the quality of the plant. So when you
disagree.
When you ingest sugars with fiber, what happens to the rate at which those sugars enter the bloodstream?
Okay, so sugars entering the bloodstream fast is better than slow. A high glycemic index is better than a low glycemic index.
Yet all of the research looking at...
I'm giving you an idea. Just before you automatically say, that doesn't work. And that's the way I lived just like you for so long, until I questioned it all. And because I stepped back and asked the question, well, why did my friend die? Why did my sister die? Why do my patients who are infertile, are they infertile? And why is it when they go paleo, keto, or carnivore, they suddenly heal and get pregnant? So, but I asked the question first, what's the energy for your mitochondria? Is it sugar or is it fat?
It's fat.
It's only fat. Okay, so what's the function of the liver? Primary function of the liver is what?
Produces glucose, metabolizes nutrients.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You mean it produces glucose first? So when you eat food, your glucose levels go up and we don't get fat. The primary job of the liver is to make fat, actually. That's why fatty liver is the most common thing. The primary job of insulin is to make fat in the liver. Have you ever heard of hepatogenous diabetes? Nobody has. How much do you know about the glycocalyx and the glycobiome?
A little bit. I know that there's very little research on it, and the research papers that exist say that it's very poorly understood.
Huge out there. Carolyn Bartozzi just won a Nobel Prize on it because it's the major work that they do to make cancer drugs and all the drugs. Now, read the Science of Glycobiology. It's the most amazing thing.
But this is getting us deep into mechanisms, and I can bring up mechanisms and say when you don't have fiber, what happens to the microbiome? It starts eating the mucus layer and you get increased intestinal permeability. And we could just be arguing about mechanisms all day.
What if there's a different story? I'm just sharing a different story. I honor your work.
Right.
But I'm just a doctor from LA, kicked out of school and again couldn't read. And I became a doctor through God's miracle. And I created a business. So the fourth largest IVF center in America. I take care of people around the globe that are suffering. And what do I talk about more than anything? Nutrition. Because my job as a doctor went into medicine to help people heal, not to make money. I make a lot of money. What I try to do with that is still make the most affordable IVF center in America. I'm the most affordable. I finance everyone. But my job is if I could write books, if I could blog, if I could do something to help you change. I'm not trying to tell everyone to be a carnivore. I just am working to help people learn something that's opposite because we're not winning in this world. More and more people are homeless, are sick. The number one reason for bankruptcy, do you know what it is? Healthcare costs. Healthcare costs go up.
But this is all stuff we agree on. We're agreeing that the state of metabolic health, cardiometabolic health is less than optimal and there is a better way of doing things. We agree on that.
100%.
It's how we get there.
I'm a surgeon. I'm a scientist. I want to know the mechanisms of everything. I never heard of hepatogenous diabetes. Hepatogenous diabetes is that the majority of liver failure patients actually become diabetic. They have high insulin and high glucose. Well, that's type 2 diabetes. Are they fat or skinny?
Probably skinny.
They're very skinny. How come?
The problem with this that I have with mechanisms is we can go all day back and forth. I can cite studies, randomized controlled trials, where they literally feed one group saturated fats from animal fats and the other group polyunsaturated fats, and you induce fatty liver, increase fat, hepatic fat in the group getting saturated fats. Outcome data to me is more important because it's the summation of all of the different mechanisms, because we can study independent mechanisms. We probably have no idea about many things that are happening when food interacts with our physiology. So what's the summation? It is the actual health outcome, the risk of developing a disease or some sort of change to an established biomarker. So I think your question about what is science to the two of us is very different.
What do you know about the cause of gastric ulcer?
Enlighten me.
Well, we thought it was stomach acids that were just running rampant. And it was a big sales of H2 blockers and Tums and all sorts of other things. And one guy said, you know what? It's a bug. It's a bacteria. And no one believed the guy. One day, he took a glass of contaminated fluids with H. pylori and drank it and gets gastric ulcers. What's the treatment for bacteria? Antibiotics. The guy took the antibiotic, cleared his H. pylori. Gastric ulcer. So science is very biased. We need to stop arguing. And let me tell you, mechanisms are critical. I want to know the why. I want to know the cellular physiology. I want to understand the glycobiome. So your blood type is determined by a protein or a sugar?
Protein.
Sugar. The glycocalyx determines everything. You're allergic to sugars, not to proteins. Proteins are good, but the post-translational modification of protein is far more important. The number one is glycosylation. So glycosylation is the addition of a sugar onto a protein to give it its proper shape, charge, and function. And the glycobiome, imagine all the plants that are out there in this world. Would we be alive without them? There'd be nothing, no life. So it turns out that there's a sugar layer or a plant layer all over every single cell of our body, but that's the barcode. That's the satellite. That's the transmitter that helps us understand everything, that every cell of your body wants to know, are you friend or foe? Are you good or bad? Wait a minute, is that the right sperm, the right egg for me to implant in, all right, or fertilize? So I want to know the science first. I'm a scientist. But I also want, so I take that and I say, okay, well, this plant is good for this, and this plant is good for this, and this plant is good for this. But then I step back and wait a minute. We have evolved trying to understand the medicinal properties of plants forever because that was our world. I mean, going out and killing a cow is rough work. Lions die killing cows, killing bulls, and many animals. It's easier to eat plants. But I believe it turns out that the plants are the leading cause of our disease because plants make substance to kill us. Now, why does the science matter? The mechanisms matter? Because a plate full of plants all breaks down to sugar. And the sugar feeds the microbes in your gut. And I'm sorry, that damages the glycocalyx of your gut, the glycobiome.
So you're equating a black bean to a jelly bean? These are the same?
Okay, so we know what a black bean is, and a jelly bean is a man-made candy.
Right, but what I'm hearing from you is they both contain carbohydrates, and at the end of the day, those carbohydrates are toxic.
Okay, so every cell of your body has a glycobiome. Every cell of your body contains sugar. And all species have their different sugar layer that we are less allergic or more allergic to. Really, most of our diseases are simply allergies. Metabolic dysfunction is damage to certain cells and certain organs of our body, and that's the problem. If the mitochondria is damaged, or the liposomes, or the ribosomes, ribosomal proteins or particles that damage it. So ultimately, if we really understand the science, the physiology, but the anatomy is so critical. So we breathe in air. Right? That's critical. And then the oxygen is delivered and the CO2 is released. Right? Okay, so now the blood is flowing to every organ of our body. The bowels. I mean, really, you have to eat food in order to survive. But what happens to the food in our gut? It's like becomes mysterious, but it's actually magical. The gut takes this beautiful, amazing food that nature has made for us so we can thrive and survive and reproduce and build our families and do the things we love to do, communicate. It's all communication. And the one thing I've learned in life is that if I can listen to something I don't believe, I might find something magical.
Oh, I'm listening. I'm listening, and I think you're a great storyteller. But can I ask you a question?
Oh, please.
Why are you so sure of your anecdotes versus someone else's anecdotes that are equal and opposite?
I'm just sharing a story in life. I could be completely wrong. But
don't you feel, though, that it's important for us to, yes, we can talk about all sorts of stories and ideas, but ultimately, if we're recommending something to public health, we need more than an anecdote or a story which is subject to a large amount of bias. Because as I said, there are anecdotes everywhere. So if we were to say anecdotes are the best form of evidence, then which anecdote do we choose to inform public health? That, to me, that part of the story sounds great, especially when there's words like mitochondria and liposome and glycobiome and people like this because it sounds fancy. But if I was to push back and say, how would I explain poor metabolic health to the average person? I wouldn't need to go into all of that detail. And people can choose which explanation they think, they think is more likely to be accurate, resonates with them.
Well,
and so my explanation of poor metabolic health, because I think that's where we're getting at, Dr. Kiltz's explanation is that it's plants at the core root of poor metabolic health. And I think it's hard to blame plants that are basically non-existent in the average person's diet, firstly. And so when I look at the current diet right now and say, well, what are the problems with this? The big ticket item is that 70% of calories are coming from ultra processed foods that are hyperpalatable. They're easy to overconsume because they're low in protein, they're low in water, they're low in fiber. And when you're constantly consuming these foods, it's very difficult to regulate the total amount of calories you're bringing in relative to the amount of calories your body actually needs. So it's very easy to eat in a calorie surplus. And over time, your body has to do something with that excess energy and it begins to store it. It can store it in subcutaneous fat, which is under the skin, and that's relatively benign, not completely, or it can start to go centrally into our organs, into the liver and pancreas, like I mentioned. And that's what I believe is at the core of poor metabolic health, is this spillover of excessive fat, which is driven largely, but not entirely, by a very hyperpalatable diet. And so to me, the answer to correcting metabolic health, let's say in this country, is not about removing plants or demonizing plants. It's about coming back to diet quality and looking at the research and saying, well, actually, when people are eating more whole grains and legumes and fiber, we see better health outcomes, not worse. Regardless of glycobiome, mitochondria, liposome, these fancy words where we can get lost in a story, what does the body of evidence show us? And I think it's very clear the body of evidence shows us that we want unrefined plant foods in our diet and we want to maximize those, and that tends to help correct cardiometabolic disease.
I have a question for you. Do you think ultra-processed foods that are originally from plants, do you think they're just as bad for your health as whole plant foods?
What is an ultra-processed food?
Well, I guess the simple definition is it's something that you probably can't make in your kitchen.
Did you go to the market to buy your food? Did you grow it yourself? And is it possible that something you're growing might eventually cause breast cancer or colon cancer, or might contain something that you're allergic to, but you don't know it right away because the allergies are slow and silent rather than rapid, like anaphylaxis? So I think that overconsumption of food is one of our biggest problems. And yes, a lot of ultra processed, but I grew up with gardens and beautiful pasta and all these sorts of things that I was getting sick to, but I didn't know it. So and one of the problems I must say is that if you're looking for the scientific data, versus, okay, are there higher drug costs today and higher costs in medicine? Are we sicker than ever before? I mean, mental disorders are on the rise. One of my good friends, Georgia Ede, wrote a book on changing your diet and change your mind and helping us. So maybe there are some simple things that we can share through stories, because your story that you mentioned about your father with heart disease was very compelling. Because it's the stories and this is what this is all about, the story.
And I love the stories.
And I'm a scientist and I love the data, but I will tell you the problem with the data and the government and trying to tell us all what we should eat is that it's wrong, and it's compelled by the My Plate or the food pyramid. And yes, Ansel Keys had something to do with that, but he also neglected to put all the data into science.
What do you mean by that? Let's double click on that, because I've researched Ansel Keys in depth.
Okay, so the study was reported with less. Some of the countries were not included.
That's not true.
Okay,
that's
I'm
not
giving
true.
you. I'm giving
but
you,
I want to clarify.
I'm going to disagree
really
with you,
clear that's not
but I'm
true.
just giving you the
Yeah,
story
let's
that
hear your
I
whole
know.
story, then
okay?
we'll hear your thoughts
Because
on Ansel.
listen, so Ansel Keys and it was against fat. It's fat is cause disease. By the way, obesity causes no disease. The fat on your body is not the cause of any disease. Visceral fat or intramuscular fat or intra-organ fat is not the cause of disease. The cause of disease is the high plant, high protein diet. Have you ever heard of protein poisoning? Do you know much about protein poisoning?
I've had numerous episodes on my podcast on protein.
Well, I missed those. Well, I'll go back to that. And by the way, your podcast is really excellent, by the way. I really have enjoyed it. It's great stories, because these are all stories. Every scientific paper is a story. And we're claiming that this story has more data that's stronger than others, but it's all opinionated. It's all our biases. We all bring our biases to everything we do because we're human beings. We have our religions, our politics, our likes and dislikes. That's the beauty of it all. Cause of disease. Look at why one person gets an infectious disease and another doesn't. One person gets some other disability. We can't answer that one. My grandmother lived 104. She smoked Pall Malls and drank Manhattans. She's an amazing woman. My parents lived to 94. I don't know how the hell they did that.
Right, but you see, I'm not denying that you hear stories like this, but what is, do you know what a bell curve is, right?
May I finish my story?
Sure, finish your story.
Yeah. And look at, the science can be like, oh, this is what it is. And we're scientists, so we're so biased, but there's so many mothers and fathers, and they're all just trying to like, hey, what do I do? Well, I went carnivore, and I would tell you, it's a crazy diet. Don't do it. Like, to eat meat and eggs and butter and cream, that's a heart attack. How much weight must a bear gain in order to gestate, hibernate, migrate? Thousands of pounds. Why are we hyperphagic? Because we have access to the food that's hyperphagic, because we're used to famines. We're used to it. That's where we came from, right? So, but we're forgetting that. So you have something wrong with your ghrelin or leptins, and you have pathologic something wrong. That's why you're obese. It's not. It's because instinctually you better be.
It's a survival mechanism
100%.
To try to eat food,
right,
which works for you in a place where there's not food abundance.
No, but food was always scarce.
That's what I'm saying. That mechanism works for you.
Right. Now we're in a world of food that's always there. Your brain has no idea that it's the year 2024 or it's the year minus 500 from today. It really is so instinctually driven to only a few things: food and reproduction, survival. Because that's what we're all here to do. This is about survival. This is about, look at me. Won't you mate with me?
We agree on
that's
all of that
we're
part
here
of the
to
story.
do.
We agree on.
And I say there's only a few things in life, but being a doctor and data statistician and a scientist is the same thing. We're fighting to be right.
Do you not think it's confusing when people are subject to all of these different conflicting anecdotes online?
I'm confused by doctors' scientific papers, and I get thousands in my office that I've been reading and looking at, and I'm like, I'm confused. I'm just trying to help someone get pregnant, have a baby, or be healthy. And if I've got to spew down, what's your LDL, HDL? I have no idea, and I don't even care, because I think it's garbage. Because Elizabeth Holmes is in jail right now over trying to get billions of dollars in order to make money to help people get all their blood testing, okay? Or Bitcoin this or this craziness. What is the most important thing to you? Your children. Yeah. That's it. My child who's just pregnant and getting married and like, all I care about is that. You don't have children yet?
I don't have children, no.
You will. Or there's the drive for that. But even if you don't have children, your same instinct is doing the same thing. We want power because we want survival, and survival is power.
Okay, I want you to be able to respond, Simon, and then I do want to get back to Ansel Keys eventually, but I have another question before we get there. So go ahead and reply, and then I have a question.
On Ansel Keys, I'll just quickly address that. The graph that gets put up where there was 6 studies that people often cite and say, this wasn't representative of the total literature. That's actually from a seminar where Ansel Keys discussed the relationship between fat and heart disease 3 or 4 years before the 7-country study had even started. And then the other graph where there's 22 data points, which there was an academic debate at the time around, is it fat, is it sugar? And the academics who thought it was sugar sort of put this graph together with 22 countries showing the relationship between saturated fat and heart disease. Not saturated fat, I should say. It was total fat at that time. And what people overlook is that even in that graph, when you look at 22 countries, the relationship still exists. There are a couple of outliers like France, and we could discuss why that may be. But generally, when you look at it, as total fat intake went up in the diet, so did incidence of coronary heart disease. And so even if you look at that graph and there's an outlier, I would question why someone would believe the outlier to be true against all of these other data points that we have. And on the stories and someone being 100 and smoking and drinking alcohol, these sorts of stories exist all over the place. And I think people need to understand that there is a bell curve. So what we see in scientific research is an average or a typical kind of outcome. None of us are average. We're going to fall somewhere on a bell curve.
There's no such thing.
And some of these points will be outliers. So when you hear a story, is that the typical, is that the normal response that someone would get to the intervention that story entailed? Or are they an outlier? Outliers are possible. They are not probable. So my job in communicating to people is looking at body of evidence and explaining to them what are the typical results that you would get with some type of dietary intervention. This episode is proudly brought to you by NordVPN, my go-to VPN for secure internet browsing at home or on the go. A VPN, or virtual private network, creates a private, secure connection by routing your internet traffic through a middleman server, protecting your data from hackers. This is especially important on public Wi-Fi, places like airports or hotels, cafes, places that I tend to be quite regularly, where our information is most vulnerable. Beyond protecting you from risks like identity and credit card fraud, NordVPN is also great for accessing geo-restricted content. I'm not sure whether I should be sharing this, so let's keep it between friends here. Using NordVPN, I can connect to a US server while in Australia to stream movies or sports unavailable locally. Yeah, I do that. NordVPN truly simplifies online security and opens a world of content, all for the price of a cup of coffee per month. I use it across all of my devices, including my phone. Stay protected and enjoy more freedom online with NordVPN. To get the very best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/theproof. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can find this link in the episode description.
So why don't you share your thoughts on Ansel Keys research, and maybe you guys can explain a little bit, for those who don't know anything about Ansel Keys, why there's such a clashing with communities. Carnivore communities seems to think that his research was flawed at best and maybe intentionally corrupted at worst. Is that correct? Whilst plant-based communities feel like his research is meaningful. So why don't you guys just
Simon is a much better expert at that research than I am. And I think, like anything else, there's a lot of research and many people have different opinions on it. The cause of disease being fat makes no sense because we evolved eating fat.
But what does evolution cared about? What does evolution care about?
Reproduction.
Correct. So, but how long does it take to get coronary heart disease?
Longer usually, not sudden in general, unless it's some inflammatory cause.
But looking back at what we ate ancestrally, all that tells us is that whatever foods those humans were eating helped them get to an age to survive and procreate and pass on their genes. It doesn't speak to that diet, those food choices being good for longevity and avoiding coronary heart disease.
Well, I don't know what will help my longevity because I have no idea how long I'm going to live or what's going to kill me. My good friend Jim Slotnick died at 25 of glioblastoma, and I equate goitrogenic foods, which we know damage the thyroid gland, and everyone has thyroid problems. It's one of the most common things that I take care of in clinical practice. And I believe that living longer, I mean, we're talking about longevity at our young ages, probably in your 30s, almost 70, and we all want to live a long time, or do we want to live a good time? And there's lots of different beliefs in that. But I would say that the story is far more powerful, and science is powerful, but you take the data and you write a story about it, because I have no idea about Ansel Keys' real research data because I've never seen it. It's just reading the stories that we're all talking about. But this is the beauty of it. But I will tell you that fat and raw fat is probably the most important thing that we should consume, but we're not. And so as a vegan, if you add coconut oil, which again, it's a choice to be whatever diet you want to live, but by eating more fat and eating less frequently and cooking the carbohydrates, the plants, to simplify them and kill the microbes, you will likely live a very healthy life.
Would you agree with his statement about evolution and its purpose to get you to the state to reproduce and not necessarily to get you to have a long and healthy life?
100%. Well,
so that if you agree with that, would you think that that is not evidence for what would be a good and healthy diet for longevity?
Well,
or even maximizing health span.
When I was in Wisconsin, and we came up to this Airbnb, this old farmhouse, and there was just covered with ladybugs. They were just, and they were all mating, and then like by the morning they're all dead on the ground. Okay, however long we're here, I don't know. I mean, I see infinite numbers of sperm eggs that never mate. Embryos that never make it to a baby. But I do agree that we're not here for a long time. We're here for a reproductive time.
Right, but I think most of the listeners, they're going to be interested in reproduction, certainly.
Yes.
And then they're also going to be interested in how can they compress the number of years where they're affected by chronic disease and their kids are affected by chronic disease, so they have more time to live a high quality of life. And
I'm here to help people eliminate those things.
I think it's a very noble pursuit, and we're on the same pursuit, right? We're coming at this from
100%.
different angles. What I'm hearing from you is that you like to have this overall story with certain data points, but yet when Ansel Keys comes up, you seem to have like a firm position on his research, but have you taken the time to look through all of his research and fully understand what was his contribution to nutrition science? What did he actually investigate? Not what's on a blog. What do the actual studies that Ansel Keys published, what do they show? And so what I find on the internet is a lot of people have very strong views about these topics, but they haven't taken the 1 or 2 weeks to look through all
Well, no, I think Ansel Keys was likely a very brilliant man. He may have had some really great science that I've never read thoroughly, but the basic concept of which was demonizing fat is what the public sees. Okay, so I'm not here to argue about his science at all. What I'm here to say is that the pushing of fat out of our diets, we went from animal fats to mostly plant oils, healthy olive oil, and other plant oils, which again, some people may have some adverse effects to plant oils, depends what it is. We know there's something called essential oils. What essential oils used for? Medicinal purposes. But do all medicinal things are good or some of them bad? I use medications that cause good things or bad things.
The dose matters.
The dose, but also the antigenicity. So most of those essential oils contain glycolipoproteins, which become antigenic. And that's one of our biggest problems. Or they contain chemicals that can affect many of the metabolic processes of your body. And that's one of the things that maybe we're not looking at carefully enough in our diets. So someone might eat a very clean diet that's a vegan or vegetarian diet or Mediterranean diet, but they may have something in there that we don't know about. And to dig deep and to try to understand that, that's why I'm fascinated by goitrogenic foods and whether or not those same goitrogenic foods can cause damage to other cells of your body rather than the thyroid gland.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, please.
You mentioned there that you just the basic premise of Ansel Keys' work around reducing fat. You don't agree with that, reducing animal fats. And my question to you is, how has animal fat consumption changed, and what have people eaten instead of animal fats?
Well, when I ask all my patients, what do they eat? And I ask them fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, go down the list, right? And they eat chicken, turkey, fish. They don't eat much red meat. It's very lean, okay? And so that's a diet of low fat.
What kind of patients do you see?
Human beings.
I know, but when do they come to you? What's their problems?
Oh, well, it's either they're not getting pregnant or they're miscarrying.
Right. So would you agree there's a big selection bias? This is not necessarily representative of population, these people.
I take care of human beings in the population.
I understand that, but being compelled to come and see someone like you, someone has to have a very specific reason. So I would be careful not to say. I would be careful not to say that what they're reporting on their dietary survey is representative of a country, because there's country data that says as people reduced animal fats, which in 1980 there was a recommendation, people didn't instead increase the consumption of healthy sources of polyunsaturated fats. They increased consumption of ultra processed foods.
I don't know what a polyunsaturated fat is. Okay.
Well, you might want to look into that.
I'm a physician in America. I'm one of the largest IVF centers in America. I take care of people from all over the globe, and I talk to people. It's my job, and I listen to their clinical ideas. Now, I'm not a statistician. I don't have a research project that I'm getting paid in order to publish, to have a mission of whatever it is, or we're really looking for what is the answer, because I think we all want to know what the answer is, but it's complicated. But ultimately, I take care of people with very little money to no money to very wealthy people and in between. So it may not be what you think is the country or the world or the people out there, but I think I have a good mix of people out there that I listen to everyone. I want to know, what do you eat? How do you live? What's your lifestyle? Because lifestyle matters too in longevity and health and wellness.
Sure, but what the point I'm getting at is that by the time people get to you, it's likely they've made a whole lot of dietary changes. When you go out and look at national representative data, people have not swapped animal fats for nuts and seeds and olive oil.
Well, nuts and
the calories
seeds
are coming from ultra processed foods, which brings me back to my earlier point.
Disagree.
Well, I mean, that's what the data shows.
Well,
So you're
let me ask you
disagreeing
something.
with large. You're disagreeing with large national
Completely.
questionnaires, surveys, based upon what you're seeing in your clinic, which I believe is subject to enormous selection bias.
I'm free I'm like online talking to people. I meet people all over the world. And so I if it's biased, it might be, but I think it's pretty representative because I see people from the ghetto and from Wall Street and everywhere in the world. And so I'm open to like know you because money doesn't matter. Your education doesn't matter. You're another human being.
But do you understand, coming back to why this is confusing to the average person, is that
The average person is smarter than you know. The internet provides more knowledge than it took when I went to medical school. I have faith in every human being being smarter than you know.
But it's confusing when you say, I have the answers based on my personal stories.
I don't have any answers.
And then Dr. Esselstyn or someone from a vegan camp says the exact same thing. It gets very confusing.
Look at. Life is confusing, right? People wear different things. They look differently. But this is the nature of life. It is confusing. But the beauty is we're all different. And we're all learning differently. Or we're listening to different stories. But it is a story. Stories are why we are here. Compelling. So ultimately, this idea of seeds and nuts are fat. Last I looked, seeds and nuts are the most antigenic things that we consume. And people are having a lot of allergies from that. Why? Well, because we're eating them like you go to Costco or wherever the big box places and you buy way too much food than you ever need. For me, I just finished a 5-day fast, a third of the year. I think fasting is one of the most fascinating and most amazing things we could do. We likely evolved as fasters because fasting reduces the intake of all the antigenic things we're putting in our body. And antigenicity is our biggest problem, which is caused by the glycocalyx.
I have a question for you, Simon. Is the scientific community corrupted and can't be trusted? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are bad apples in any industry. And that's one of the reasons you need to be looking for data that is replicated and is consistent across different laboratories, different countries. We're not going out and just cherry picking one story or one piece of evidence. Looking at the total body of evidence. And back to what I said earlier, you're looking for mechanisms to support observational studies, to support clinical trials. And I find it hard to believe the entire scientific community is corrupt, even though that there might be some bad apples within it. As I say, there are bad apples in every single industry out there.
Is it fair to say, though, that the people who are funding the study might potentially have a biased interest for a certain outcome and that it could potentially influence the people who are studying the topic?
Of course. And that's why you have to read into the methods. Just because there is a certain funder doesn't mean you write a study off straight away. You need to review the study's method and determine for yourself based on the trial that they've set up, how they've analyzed the results, and you come to your own conclusion. That's why it's a very good practice to read the methods and the results before an intro abstract or discussion. And any good scientist will do that. So yeah, to answer your question, can industry influence studies? Yes, they can. But they're not always funding studies with a preconceived idea of this is the result we're paying for. And people probably are led to believe that that's happening everywhere. It's not.
So who are the people funding studies in general? Are they big corporations? Is it big avocado?
It's a mix of corporate companies, the dairy industry, the beef industry, the cereal industry, government, private donors. It depends on the study you're looking at.
So just like my thoughts hearing that is that if they're spending money, they are trying to get an outcome, And so this is where I'm seeing your feelings of corruption in science. Is that fair to say that they're looking for a certain outcome?
I'm not claiming it's corrupt.
Okay.
This
So
is the world. This is the world we live in.
Okay. So what do you think about
biased.
science then? Is there any way for you to decipher which science is not biased? Is there a way to tell and piece that out and say, okay, this one is less likely to be biased or corrupted, and this one has a lot of bias involved?
Does it make sense? Does it make sense? That's what I asked the question. And we have many scientific projects that we look at all the time, and we do science in our practice, and we're always reading the papers, but we always question it. And what people write doesn't mean it's all accurate, because we're all biased in what we might put in there or not. But I love science. I love the companies that I do work with. They're companies that make a lot of money with the science of. So I'm gonna recommend a certain test for you. Okay. Then the question is that test accurate in defining what you want to do? And there's a lot of bias. One, and plus all testing has some inaccuracies natural to it, right? No test is 100% accurate. So the biggest problem is that you may be paying a lot of money for a test in order to get a certain outcome, which you may not get. And so I'm not claiming corruption, but in some way we're all a little corrupt. All of us are biased, right? I love pizza, pasta, bread. Do I sometimes eat those things? Sure I do. I'm not sort of like, oh, never touch those things. But if it causes an anaphylactic reaction, you better not. And that's the challenge. But I think that, this is not going to solve the debate of what to eat, because we're all going to come up with our own belief systems based on the stories we're told or the experiences that we've lived through some person.
Okay, so when we spoke on the phone before this episode, we discussed how scientific studies are basically a collection of stories. I think I remember you telling me that. Is that correct?
100%.
Accurately? Okay, so is it fair then to say, because it seems like you believe that scientific studies can be inaccurate, that also potentially, is it possible stories can be inaccurate? Because I can think of times where I personally have, felt, oh, this is what caused this specific thing. And then later down the road, I realized, oh, wait, it was actually something completely different. So how often would you think that just stories are potentially misunderstood, our own stories even?
Oh, it's all a story. None of it is true, except we believe it. And the power of biology of belief is really the most powerful thing in the universe. That's why God, the concept of God, is the most powerful thing, because it's a story that no one could prove. And science is something that, we've grown at so much amazing things in science, but it is a story. A scientific paper must tell a compelling story and for us to believe it. Now, because that's how many people look at it. And all I can tell you is that people are always arguing about the methodology and the data and whether or not they came to the right conclusions. But that's always going to be the nature of it.
Okay. Do you have something you want to respond to that? And then I have another question.
I think fundamentally science is, for me, about moving closer to some form of truth and reducing uncertainty. I think we're terrible at understanding our own lived experience and telling that story. And, I see numerous anecdotes online of people saying they removed seed oils and miraculously their health recovered. And you dig a little deeper and, what foods did they remove? And it was a lot of ultra processed foods. Or was it the seed oils, or was it other constituents in the ultra processed foods? And so we can get attached to a story and become an advocate. I'm going to advocate for the complete removal of seed oils, and they're toxic, from my N=1 lived experience, but it's not necessarily the explanation for why my health improves. And you see that across the entire sort of diet tribe spectrum.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do seed oils cause disease?
Well, what
in
I'll
general,
just point to, no, I don't think they do.
Guess what? I agree with you.
Well, that's one thing we agree on.
Absolutely. Because I think it's...
But why do you take that position? Because we probably take that position for different reasons.
Well, I love olive oil. I'm not a coconut fan. I love olive oil with a little garlic and a few other things.
Right, but let's say something like soybean or sunflower oil.
Okay, so Don't know those answers so much. Okay, so but plant oils are industrial productions anyway.
But what does that mean?
Well, meaning that you and I have had no significant access to the seed oils until it was produced and put in a jar or a bottle. And
does that mean it's automatically bad for our physiology?
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay. But I don't like consuming things that didn't exist years ago and likely weren't my evolutionary nutrition. Okay. So that's why I stay away from them in general.
So how do you know the foods that you consume in the ratios and amounts that you do were available to our ancestors?
Well, I think beef was. Now, was it a cow? Was it a mammoth? I don't know that answer. Okay. I can only eat what I have available today. But I can tell you that seed oils were not significant in our consumption at all. And so I just don't eat them very much. But I don't think that the major cause of our disease, but because most people cook with them and do a little in them, but I think, and fat certainly isn't the cause of disease. That's why I go right to plants are the major culprit in most of our disorders. And that's really it. It's the foundation. It's simple. You can eat them, but because we eat 3 to 6 meals a day, between the day you're born and the day you die, your gut is full of plants digesting. And digesting plants mean you're breaking down the complex carbs slowly over time, and you're delivering them to your bloodstream. That means your glucose level is higher than it normally would be if you're intermittently eating or eating mostly a animal-based diet. But you can do it as a plant-based diet also, as I said. But the cause of most disease is the fact that our gut is full of digesting plants, and you're fermenting, and plus the sugar is going, and glycation is a leading cause of disease. And we see it every day. And I even think we see it in our mental disorders and in all of our physical disorders. That's why if you could simply just eat one meal a day, and you cook your carbs and simplify them, because complex carbs and fiber are the cause of disease. And when you really dig deep into it, you'll understand it better. But fat and oils in general are not. But are we planting and all this seed oil production that may be harmful for our environment? Maybe. That's not my fight.
There's a lot in there to unpack. I keep coming back to a few different points. One is that very consistently we see in observational evidence and in clinical trials, people who eat more whole grains and fiber do better. They have lower risk of colorectal cancer, cardiometabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So that evidence is there and it's consistent, it's global. When it comes to fat, the evidence is consistent. It's confusing, and it can be confusing for a number of reasons. One, the saturated fat is a big umbrella term. They're not all equal. How saturated fat affects your health outcomes will depend on the type of saturated fats you're consuming. And if you were to remove them, what do you replace? Generally, we see if you look at clinical trials, when people will replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fats, so animal fats for plant oils, people have lower cardiovascular disease incidence and events. And to go a step kind of back, I wrote down ApoB, right? So you guys were talking about science and this idea of stories and how do we come to recommendations. And I was trying to explain that I'm looking for converging lines of evidence. So let's take something like earlier you said you don't look at LDL cholesterol. And I'll explain why I think LDL cholesterol, or more specifically something like ApoB, is important to look at and is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and is causal in the development of atherosclerosis. So the first piece of evidence that you begin to go, maybe LDL cholesterol is something that correlates with disease is large-scale observational studies, okay? These studies are not perfect, but typically people in the population that have higher LDL cholesterol have higher incidence of coronary heart disease. Okay, interesting data point. Consistent across the world. Now, let's take it a step further. Let's look at Mendelian randomization studies. Let's look at genetic variants. So these are things that people now have from birth. You inherit your genes from mummy and daddy. So we take out some of these confounders that might exist at a population level. Maybe the people with low LDL cholesterol also exercise more and smoke less. Now we're looking at people who inherit some type of gene from birth and have either a low LDL cholesterol or a gene that gives them high. What's the difference in risk? And you see this log linear increase in risk. As the more that genetic variation increases their LDL, or more specifically ApoB, and we can go into that if we want to, the higher their risk of coronary heart disease. Okay, so cool. So now we have observational evidence, large populations, showing us that this risk factor is associating with coronary heart disease, the number one cause of death globally. Okay, let's take it a step further. What about we do clinical trials with people who are at high risk of heart disease, and we lower their LDL cholesterol or ApoB? What do we see? And again, we see reductions in risk of coronary heart disease as you get ApoB down. So here's 3 clear lines of evidence that show benefit to reducing ApoB for a very important health outcome, coronary heart disease. And then we say, okay, well, how do you get LDL cholesterol or ApoB down? What's one of the main aspects of our diet that influences this biomarker? The type of fat we're eating. And when you look at clinical trials swapping saturated fat, I mentioned this before, for polyunsaturated fat, you see LDL cholesterol come down. And overall, across the broad body of evidence, when you look at meta-analyses, you see a reduction in cardiovascular events. That's the way that I approach
Can
science.
I ask you a question?
Sure.
What were the fats? What were the sources of those fats?
Animal fats were butter, mostly.
For saturated and unsaturated?
The unsaturated fats.
You said
plant oils. Plant oils.
Plant oils.
Yeah.
With unsaturated.
Unsaturated fats.
So it was animal fat versus plant oils.
In these randomized controlled trials.
Right. They used plants or animal were the different fats.
Yeah, so one group has a higher saturated fat intake from animal fats.
So animal fat versus plant oils.
Correct.
Right, because unsaturated and polyunsaturated and all these things, these are confusing for most of us. But it's either eating animal fat or plant oils. The plant oils did superior.
Correct. When you look at a meta-analysis and you look across the board.
And so where does animal fat come from? An animal. Does any corporation or company sponsor them or sell them? You don't. But the plant oils are sponsored by large corporations.
I mean, there's the beef industry and the dairy industry. They profit.
They don't actually, because they actually stay out of that completely. Okay.
They don't fund science. The cattle industry.
Very little actually. Very little. So
I find that very hard to believe.
It is hard to believe. But the cattle industry actually is the small farmers, the ranchers are losing. The large, they're 4-packers, the most producers are really just, it's all food industry, okay?
But you think the big meat companies and the big dairy companies are not funding science?
There is less science coming from those. Well, they are, because they're all owned by the same large corporations that control most of the food anyway. But the point a little bit is, when you talk about saturated, unsaturated fats, we're talking about plant oils versus animal fat, right? And there's some bias to where the money comes from. And I can only tell you this, having dealt with a lawsuit over of patent infringement over someone's claim of something in the supplement world that I didn't know there was a patent on it. But then I come to find out that the science is supposedly wrong, but many of my scientific colleagues are all invested in this stuff. And so the point is, a little bit is, the population, the people in general, I don't think should trust a lot of this stuff.
But they should trust you.
Oh, don't trust me at all. No. Look at.
But you're telling them a story.
I'm giving you 100%. Look, I've learned this not from doctors, but I suffered for years terrible bowel bleeding. Like, I would bleed a quart of blood in the toilet, and I would have kidney stones. I had migraines, arthritis. I'd go to the doctor. I'd just get another drug. I had chronic upper respiratory inflammation for years. I went carnivore and it went away. Now, again, this is my anecdote. You might listen to a vegan or a carnivore or something in between. Beauty is power today, is you can learn from a story. But I'm blogging, telling this story because I want you to be healthy and well. Now, if you're a vegan, I'll give you my vegan opinions. If you're a standard eater, I'll give you that. If you want to look at the carnivore, because that's what it took for me. And so the whole point is that it does take the ability, because you're podcasting health and wellness ideas, correct?
A lot of the time.
Are you a doctor?
No.
Do you have a doctor degree and PhD in something in science? No. Okay, but how are you doing that? Because you care. Now, you're coming across with your opinion, which is powerful. Podcasting, I call this social media, social medicine. Now everyone has access. I have so many patients that come to me. They know so much more than I even know in some areas. I'm just impressed with all of them. And the job is to share the story of what you have to share, what I have to share, what you have to share, so that everyone has access to different opinions. Then they could decide. I mean, I have a carnivore group. I call it keto carnivore because it invites everyone, not just people who want to only eat meat. I mean, most people don't want to just eat meat, but depending on what they're suffering from, that's the critical point to these stories that we're telling on this beautiful Ellen Fisher podcast.
Thank you for being here, by the way. You are so gracious and kind, both of you guys.
Oh, no.
I'm loving this conversation. I have a question. You mentioned something about the big meat and dairy industries you're saying are owned by these plant corporations. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I mean,
wouldn't that mean that
food.
So wouldn't that mean that part of their bias was to prove that the meat and dairy is good for you?
I don't understand it completely, but from many of the meat producers, they're just sharing their food, and I wish they would share more about how healthy and important fatty meat is, but it's really not being pushed out that way because the majority of people won't buy it anyway. And I'm not blaming the food industry for where we're at, because we all have to take responsibility individually for our health and wellness. And that's what this story is really about. Take full responsibility to listen to differing opinions in all of this. But I think for sure, I know the American Heart Association, American Diabetic Association, all these associations are getting money from large food corporations. Now, the small meat producers, they're not getting many big handouts from the government in order to grow the meat.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I've always heard the opposite personally, that there isn't really big avocado or big broccoli, but there is big meat and dairy that are invested into science, nutrition science. So I'm wondering, is there a way to parse out how many studies are being funded? I don't know how important you would find that, Simon, but I think a lot of people would find that interesting. How much of the research is being funded by animal agriculture industries versus processed food industries and stuff, and plant industries?
I think we're all funding it. And yes, there's bias in all of it, right? I would say in general, the word is that meat is not so good and plants are better. I mean, that's the sort of the bias we all share out there, because I love a good salad. And I think that is our bias, and where the money's coming from, I think it's important. But, I don't generally podcast about, well, they're doing this and, you can better be careful of that. My podcasts are, hey, this is what I have found for your health and wellness, not against this or that. Because when you fight something, you know what it does? It fights back.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason I invited you, and then I didn't invite some of the other people who are just very negative about plant-based eaters or anything. I really appreciate your positivity in just sharing your story and your beliefs on things. I think it's really cool. So yes, Simon, what are your thoughts on all that?
Can I say one other thing?
Yeah.
I just want to, I honor Simon for what he's doing and what you're doing. And I may have said this a little before, but we must hear all sides. And we must have the ability to listen to the science or listen to the stories in order to formulate what is right. Because is there one that's going to be for everyone? Not happening.
All right, Simon, take it away.
This episode is proudly brought to you by 38 Terra. Try 38 Terra's DMN prebiotic, the science-based daily multivitamin for your gut microbes, a simple and delicious way to take your gut health to the next level. Now back in stock in new and improved packaging for customers living in the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Get 10% off your DMN at 38terra.com using the code THEPROOF. That's 38terra.com and use the coupon code THEPROOF for 10% off. I too am really grateful for this opportunity and to get this time to sit down with you because, believe it or not, I think critical to science is being able to present your views out to the world and have them challenged.
Yeah.
So, as soon as you suggested having this conversation, I was, jumping at the opportunity. So I'm really grateful to be here, even though we clearly have some different views on things. I personally, it's a little bit of a red flag, the whole don't trust the science, the institution. And, I'm just telling my story. I have the answer. That's how and I'm not just directing this at you. I see it across the board. It's a very similar story that is used in all these different diet camps. And the reason that concerns me is people don't know what to believe because they're being exposed to all of these different stories where people say, this is the way to eat for optimal health. And then they scroll up on social media and it's someone else saying the exact opposite. And people end up throwing their hands up in the air and saying, I just don't know what to eat. There's nothing left anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And that sucks. That sucks. Right. And I speak to people all the time who end up in that position. I spoke to a girl yesterday who had written a comment on my YouTube basically pouring her heart out, saying that she had clinical depression, had tried seeing a psychiatrist, came across a carnivore community, tried carnivore. It didn't help her. She's like now saying, should I flip-flop to a vegan diet? And I was just thinking, gosh, this person, she needs to go and get care and be seen as an individual patient. She's being exposed to all this information on social media and is clearly very, very confused. And so I don't think that it's necessarily helpful having all of these anecdotes out there. I think it's more helpful to communicate science in what I would say is a more responsible manner, is to look at the body of evidence and say, here at a population level is what a healthy dietary pattern looks like. This is going to be healthy for reproduction. It's going to be healthy for reducing your risk of developing obesity and type 2 diabetes when you're older, reducing your risk of cancer, etc. And there's been so much fighting within the science community and online. And today we're coming back to sugar versus fat, right? And that's been going on for 70 years. It's a ridiculous argument. Both can be a problem in a diet. You can have a diet that has poor quality fats, and you can have a diet that has poor quality carbohydrates. And diet quality is what matters most, not this macronutrient fight of carbohydrates versus fat. And I've already explained what I think that looks like in terms of a dietary pattern. And I think one of the most sensible dietary patterns that ticks those boxes is a Mediterranean diet done properly, as it is kind of defined within the literature, not pizza and pasta every night, although I'm sure some would enjoy that. But yeah, that's, I guess, what my position here is. I think that your mission and dedication to improving the health of your patients is admirable. I think you're extremely well-intentioned. But what I find is when people get caught up in anecdotes, they want their diet to kind of be the best for everything. And it might be that your diet is helping your patients with their fertility. The question is it their best diet long-term for risk of cancer, risk of cardiovascular disease? These are different outcomes, and that's a different question.
Yeah, we don't know that answer. And because we're all going to die of something. And we're not here to whitewash the story. And I'm not trying to cleanse anyone as right or wrong. And you don't have the right answer, and I don't have the right answer. We just have our story of what you have found in your studying of the data, and I have my answer, what I have found in studying the data also. And because I read data, I've sifted through it and put it together, and what I've seen. Now, they're not my patients, by the way. They're just human beings that we're all sharing a story with. And someone's you'll never, I have people that I've never met before say, I got pregnant with Dr. Kiltz's diet. Now, and there are plenty of people that get pregnant on vegan, vegetarian, all diets. Okay. This is the beauty of it, right? And you spiritual, religious at all, you have your belief system. You have your belief system. There are infinite belief systems that we have. Would nutrition be any different? Our cultures are so different and beautiful. And so we have to honor those things. You're talking to people that are suffering, and I talk to people that are suffering. And so, the beauty is, I recommend acupuncture, massage, meditation, prayer, many things that people can do, because there's a whole complex components to all of this that helps people find their health and wellness. And that's why I think it's so important that, carnivore's the only way, or vegan's the only way. No, you're going to find something that works for you, and why someone gets a disease and someone doesn't. That's the part we don't have the absolute answer. Okay, genetic predisposition, the epigenetics, your environment of what you drink, eat, and think. Even thinking could be a component to all of this, right? When you're more positive or certain of something, the outcome is more certain to happen. And that's one of the beauties to all of this.
We're kind of going a little bit off track because there's a lot there that I agree with. There's so much in this conversation where there's little bits I agree with and certain bits I disagree with. I think that we need to understand that I think Dr. Kiltz just said, we don't know what the causes of these diseases are. And I would push back and say there are many modifiable risk factors for cardiometabolic diseases and cancer that we do understand. Blood pressure, obesity, elevated blood glucose, elevated ApoB, all of these different modifiable risk factors. And through the scientific method, we understand how a dietary pattern, that's what we're here to talk about today, how a dietary pattern affects those modifiable risk factors. And so the dietary pattern that I'm recommending people follow, which could be a Mediterranean diet. So it's a diet that can have animal fats and animal food, animal protein in it for sure, is a dietary pattern that is supported by the evidence to shift these modifiable risk factors that we've identified in science. These are risk factors that elevate your risk of cancer, elevate your risk of type 2 diabetes, elevate your risk of having a heart attack. Shifts these risk factors in a favorable direction, lowering your overall risk of developing those diseases. And that's kind of the main point that I want to get across, and how I come to the recommendations that I'm giving to my community.
Yeah.
May I make one other comment? Because I didn't say we don't know the cause of disease. We don't know the cause of disease in individuals. Exactly. Meaning that why one person gets the disease and another person doesn't. But I think that ultimately, a high plant-based, frequent consumption, whether it's processed or unprocessed, those are likely the leading causes, what I believe. So that's why you can change some ways you do it. Does red meat cause disease? Not likely.
What's the very best evidence you have that we can just point someone to who's listening that supports the idea that high plants, unprocessed plants included, are causing disease?
What's a goiter?
Well,
Is goiter very common? So goiter is thyroid disease.
Enlarging.
Thyroid, not just enlargement, but much of it is a change in the thyroid gland itself. They can be hyper, hypo, or euthyroid. So you may have normal function, or you may have abnormal function, and you may develop tumors, cysts within the thyroid gland. Okay, so we know that there are certain plants that are predisposed to causing thyroid damage. Okay. So we know that, but why one person gets it and another person doesn't, we don't know that.
Can I give you an anecdote
Plant
right now?
lectins, oxalates, and phytates are also well known. I had kidney stones for years. Did anyone say, Dr. Kiltz, you're eating so much spinach. Could that be a cause of your problems? Nobody did. So we don't, and the beauty I love is that we need to talk about food and nutrition much more than we're talking about anything else.
I'll give you an anecdote just to illustrate how confusing it is to zoom in on anecdotes. My mum had hypothyroidism, and she was eating a diet that was very rich in animal foods and ultra-processed foods. Her diet now is much more plant-based, unprocessed. What's happened to her thyroid function? Markedly improved. Markedly improved. We can point to anecdotes everywhere. Well, no, so she increased plant foods in her diet and thyroid function improved.
But as I said, we can't pick out the individual. As you said, you're not an average. You're a data point. Where people come to me all the time, well, what are my odds of getting a baby out of these treatments? Well, they're either 0 or 100. We don't know which one you are. We can take a population and put that population together and give you a number that you're going to say, okay, well, should I put my money on this horse or that horse? So that's the, you know, it's, as I age and I experience more and more and more in this world, I see our inability to be right or wrong all the time. That's the beauty of it. And especially when it comes to diet, I've been through them all over the years, and beauty to your mom for that. And again, I didn't tell anyone not to eat plants, but if you have a specific disease.
But you just told us that you think plants are the cause of all of these diseases. And I said, what's the best evidence? And you brought up goiter.
Okay, so we know that there are goitrogenic foods. They're listed as goitrogenic foods. We know they may be a culprit in causing the thyroid disease. Now, again, this is not to say everyone's going to get it, okay? Why would my daughter die from a banana or an avocado? Why is she allergic to those things? Or some people are allergic to peanuts and not others. I'm not telling everyone to stop eating peanuts, but these are factors.
If we sat down with Justin or Erica Sonnenberg, who are from Stanford that research the microbiome, they would say a lot of these intolerances to foods and allergies are downstream of an ultra-processed fiber deficient diet that has damaged the microbiome and is now no longer equipped.
They've damaged the glycobiome, the glycocalyx, not the microbiome.
Right. Well, what I'm saying to you is that they would, through their research, would say it is a fiber deplete diet that has essentially starved the microbiome. So what I'm saying to
you mean they have no microbes in their gut?
They're putting forward a completely different mechanistic explanation for autoimmune diseases, inflammatory conditions than you. And it gets confusing when people are exposed to all these different ideas. That's why, for me, I come back and say, okay, those mechanisms are interesting, but when people are eating more of these cruciferous vegetables, they're tending to do better. Admittingly, and sure, when we're looking,
that may be your biased observations also.
Well, I'm taking that out of large scale studies.
That could be biased observations and could be incorrect.
Well, they are observational studies,
and they could be wrong.
They could be. They're open to error, but they're more likely. I would say they're more likely to be accurate than what we see and don't see. I think our personal experience is prone to an enormous amount of bias, more than we imagine.
Do people buy magazines and all these great magazines right at the marketplace, and they're online with social media and looking at people who are sharing stories? That's more powerful than a scientific data that 99% of people will never read. And people are not looking to the doctors or the scientists anymore. They're looking to their neighbor, their friend, or they're looking to podcasters to share something that's more powerful today than ever before.
But what people are looking for and what's accurate are not necessarily the same thing.
How do you know what's accurate?
Well, we have to come.
How do you
we
know,
have to come together.
How
that's
do
what
you
the
know
scientific
accuracy
method
more than anyone else?
That's what the scientific method is for.
So we're trusting in science for all of us. You're right. Scientific method. You're right. It's supposed to give us accurate information. We're getting sicker and sicker and sicker over science. I'm not against science. I'm all for it. But if I'm the scientist and I have the answer for you, as if I'm going to cleanse your world, and I'm going to give you the right answer. We do not have weak and meek people out there. We have weak and meek people because they're eating and consuming the same advice we've all been giving as scientists.
But you're blaming science.
I am not disbelieving science. What I've learned is science can be wrong.
Sure.
And so I don't have the right answer for you. You don't have the right answer for anyone else either. You have a story to tell of why you believe this is true. And that some people are going to find it true and live it, and they're going to experience it good. But some people are not.
So, Dr. Kiltz, do you believe in objective truth for nutrition?
Objective truth.
Yeah, like, is it just my truth, your truth, or is there a truth that is universal? Doesn't mean that it doesn't mean there isn't variances in each person, but is there a truth about nutrition that there is a diet that is closer to be better for human health? Or is it just my truth, your truth?
Ultimately, it's all our individual truth, because that's the universe. We're all unique and different, and we have our belief systems. Now, in my opinion, I think a primarily animal-based diet is less likely to cause and or may help reduce disease. Now, I'm giving you my opinion like you're giving your opinions. We're all opinionated. This is the beauty of all of us. We're not here as dictators to tell, well, we're going to make a diet that's good for everyone. And that's like a little crazy. If you think you're going to make a diet for everyone.
That's certainly not my position, that there's one diet for everyone. I think the something that where we disagree on is you seem to be thinking that science has led to the current state of diet in this country. And I would push back, and I would say that what we would be better off focusing on is the inability to actually adhere to the recommendations that science puts forward, because almost no one, less than 5% of Americans, are eating according to dietary regulations. It's very hard, dietary recommendations. It's very hard to blame something that people are not actually doing themselves.
I like your word regulation better, because it is true, they're rules, right? They're rules to try to control people. And we don't need to be controlled. We need to be free. And each of us needs to be free to choose our own diet, number one. But we need to get the truth. And science is not truth-seeking.
So what is truth-seeking then, if not science, when it comes to choosing foods for human health?
Open and unbiased.
Because I'm not 100% clear on what science means to you or how you've come to any of this other than your own lived N=1 experience.
I work in a world of medicine. What's the most important thing to the modern medical machine?
Profits.
Profits. Is any other industry different? Is science industry different? You know the Flexner report that Rockefeller put through years ago in like 1910, where basically took over the control of the science, the research, the medical schools and the training. See, I went into medicine thinking I was strictly going to help people, but I was learning the way, how to make a diagnosis of a disease, how to write a prescription, how to define the other diagnostic or therapeutic procedures. Did I realize that it really wasn't trying to understand the cause of disease? Now, I love nutrition because I think it is deep in the causes. I was at University of Southern California, I was a nutritional biochemistry major. Okay, I worked in a lab, and it excites me. It's so interesting to me to learn more about this. But ultimately, it's about money.
So,
but is your practice not about money?
Well, of course it is. Profits matter in order to keep and push the machine. I'm a third the price of the majority of other fertility people out there.
Do you think you stand out by having an opinion of they got it all wrong and I have the answer? Does that help your business?
I'm not claiming anyone has it wrong. Again, I'm just sharing my thoughts and ideas. I'm not claiming that going for money is wrong and not going for money is right. What I'm claiming here is that we have a system that we have to help give people more information freely so they can help make the decisions. We're not trying to regulate anything. We're trying to open up the possibilities that everyone has the right for their own decisions and what they do in their health and wellness. But people are suffering and they're getting sicker. And is it because we're producing a lot of processed food? I mean, I grew up on all the processed foods, surely some of it anyway. And we certainly need to guide people to more holistic food. And I like the Mediterranean diet, but I still think the Mediterranean diet is high in plants and low in fat and not enough fatty meat personally. I think we can do better on it than we're doing. And I think 3 meals a day is wrong.
Right. And it's the evidence that informs that we're essentially disagreeing.
Yeah. I do think that there's a growing population of people concerned over authority in science, in government bodies telling us what to do, in mainstream media telling us, and people wanting to think for themselves. And so stories are powerful and are influential. And so I just wonder if there's a balance between both of what you're saying, that there's like, is there a way for us to look at the science and also be a little bit more aware of potential bias? What are your thoughts?
I mean, my personal view is that what we see in the data and then recommend to the public at a population level is one thing. And within that, everyone should understand that as an individual, they should be toggling things around and titrating things based on their blood test results, how they're feeling, what are their goals, where's their health at. So back to earlier, I said, I don't believe there's one best diet. I think within the framework that I described, you can do it low carb, you can do it high carb, you can do it low fat, high fat. So I think individualization occurs within a framework that we understand is conducive to reducing your risk of chronic disease and increasing health span.
The majority of the world lives day to day with little money and little resources, and they're highly controlled and regulated in their populations. And I think we really want to bring freedom to everyone. Food freedom, freedom in their life choices. And people are suffering tremendously. And I think that we're not here to regulate anyone. We're not here to control anyone. We're here to give them the knowledge. You don't have to go to school anymore for college in order to get the knowledge. It's right there. I had to go to medical school to gain the power and the knowledge. Even going to university has not been around for that long for most people in the world. Today, you could get it all online for free. That's the beauty of it. Blood testing. Why do we need so many testing? We need less and less and less. I think we test too much. I got a CAC score that was 700. Next day I'm doing all these testing. They wanted more testing. I got a CT angiogram and I'm fine. And so we're creating worry in the world. We're creating like, you better do this diet or you better get your test for this or that. The testing world is $1 billion world. And ultimately people can't afford it. But how do you feel? And are you doing the things that also bring about health and wellness besides whichever diet you choose? But the world of let's get a test, let me review your test and tell you what you need to do, even that isn't accurate because every test has a positive and negative predictive value that is not perfect either. So ultimately, I think we can agree that it's important to offer information to everyone. In a way that we have conversations with even people with opposite views.
Yeah. So I can see a common theme. I'm going to picture in the comment section from listening to this, and it would be something like, why does it have to be carnivore versus plant-based? Why can't it just be a balance of both? I really appreciate that you brought that up. I do think that you're one of the few plant-based advocates that isn't necessarily looking for studies that are only going to prove the bias to eat only plants. And, you do recommend sometimes that it could be healthy to include some fish or eggs, I think is, correct me if I'm wrong, in the way that you advocate. And so what are your thoughts on that? Why not just plants and animals?
Well.
In balance is what people say.
So I don't know what balance means.
Okay.
It's another word.
Yeah.
Right? Live a balanced diet.
Right.
Life builds life. And so the majority of the food we eat is devoid of most of the fat or the skin or the bones or the head. So we're eating a non-natural diet anyway. And so a lean meat diet, whether it's red meat or white meat or anything else, is also problem. And if you simply think you could add a plant oil or seed oil to that, I don't think that's healthy for us. I think the critical part is add animal fat and eat less frequently. Can you eat some plants? You can. Should you prepare them properly? So animals are probably better raw and plants are better cooked because they simplify the sugars, kill the microbes when you do the plants. But I'm not opposed to eating. I don't like the word balance. You know, you want to eat some plants, you want to eat some animals, go at it. It depends on your environment. The problem is our environment is, you know, you have access to all food all the time, which is also not natural for us. So I think that I don't like the word balance because you can't be married and have a boyfriend and girlfriend on the side. So that's balance, right? And so this idea that you can have whatever you want, we know that doesn't make sense. You know, alcohol is deadly. I mean, the American College of OB/GYN recommends red wine. Is alcohol good for us? It's not. And we're making it in our gut. Might that be the cause of much disease for our children, eating a lot of fiber, which probably is a cause of cancer and other diseases?
Your thoughts, Simon?
I mean, we could double click on a lot of things. I can
love double clicking.
cite I can cite a study out of Harvard, randomized controlled trial.
They're not biased.
One of the randomized controlled trials that's actually put people on an animal-based diet and a plant-based diet for 5 days. And just to drill home a point here that we can cherry pick and look at mechanisms and things all day. And in 5 days on an animal-based diet, what happened to the microbiome? An increase in a bacteria called Biophilia wadsworthia. Do you know what that is?
It's a bacteria.
Yeah, and it's an inflammatory bacteria. And that was within 5 days, right? So we can zoom in and cherry pick and talk about anecdotes and all of this stuff all day long. I have a problem with this idea of not trusting the science, but then thinking people on social media are somehow going to do a better job at getting to the truth. And one of the reasons for that, and whether they're a doctor or not, is how are people motivated online who are creating information right now? What's the motivation behind the content that gets created? No, it's no different to any industry. It's money. It's advertising and having extreme views coming out and saying, you know, a carnivore diet will do this or a vegan diet will do this is a good way to grab attention. And the more nuanced, objective, evidence-based position is a little less sexy. It doesn't grab the headlines as much. And so it doesn't get as much attention. So, you know, to point to science and say there's corruption and there's money there, but not to highlight that the same driver exists on social media today and all of these extreme messages, which I think you said we don't like to create fear. I think all these extreme diet positions are creating fear because, as I said earlier, one group says you cannot eat this, sugar's doing this to your gut. The next group says any amount of animal fat or any amount of meat's doing this. Can you see how confusing that is for someone? That is where most of the fear online. And when I speak to people, that's the feedback I get. They don't know what to eat anymore.
In my scientific communities, we've been arguing about the same science for years and years and years. It's confusing in science too. So I can just tell you, we're not here to decide who can tell and who can't, because we have the freedom for the conversation. And again, we're all out there sharing. And I'm not trying to say they shouldn't be there and they should. And we're all there to share a story. And ultimately, it's the stories and the microbes in our gut. Some are good, some are bad. Which determines one's good and one's bad? Is it different types or the different environments?
Could be both.
It's mostly the different environments, because most of these microbes exist everywhere in our environment. But depending on the other factors, especially the breakdown of the glycobiome, which allows those microbes to get into our bloodstream and cause much disease. And so, 5 days on any diet, I mean, that's not science to me.
I'm not putting that forward as saying I base my recommendations off that. I'm saying we can drill in and you can talk about the glycobiome. I can look at a 5-day randomized controlled trial, and all day long we can point to various bits of evidence. The question is, how do we actually come to good public health recommendations? And for me, I can stand here wholeheartedly and look at you, look at the person listening and saying, you know what, you're right. There is no truth. Science isn't about knowing the exact truth. It's about reducing uncertainty. And through a scientific method, we over time can evolve our understanding of nutrition and human health. And I am far more certain that a Mediterranean diet is better for cardiometabolic health based on the available evidence than a carnivore diet or anything close to a carnivore diet.
We're all sharing our stories. You individually are sharing a story of your beliefs, of the data, the science.
But that's a false equivalence, because I'm going to a body of evidence.
I'm telling my story of what I think we're all doing. You're doing it. I'm doing it. We're giving our opinions of it based on what we look at and see, and we're all biased based on our subconscious minds and what it has behind us. That's what this story is about. And so ultimately, we should not be here to say this is what everyone should do. That's dictatorial, socialistic. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to help individuals have the access to the information so they can make the changes in their lives that are critical in whichever way they want to do. And again, I have a license to practice medicine, which I'm so grateful for in some ways. But here's what I tell everyone. I'm not your doctor. You are. You're your own doctor. You have access to more information. Don't trust your doctors. I'm not saying don't trust them and walk away.
So you don't think that people need guidelines?
Okay. So what I'm saying about trust. So trust and verify, as they say. Okay. Our job is to give information that we believe in, but we want to also give information that people can have access to this and knowledge. I mean, I write books I hope are simple. I don't want to use the word simple, but they're in a way that people can look at them and enjoy them and learn about them, even opposite ideas. The more we do that, the better the better we all evolve in a better place. I mean, I walk down the streets here. There's such an eclectic diversity everywhere. And so for any one science, this is what happens to me in my practice, or happened to me at the hospital. Says, you can't talk about this. You can't talk about it? Well, maybe like, hey, this seems very opposite of what we're doing. Can you talk about it a little more? Let's all learn from it. That's what we're here to do, and come to some consensus where we can all get along.
And I agree with that, but the consensus as it stands is not a carnivore diet. And I'm certainly not suggesting dictatorship. I am not suggesting that. The individual listening, free to eat however they want. What I'm talking about is, what are the general public health guidelines for the person that's not going to be out there going through all the evidence, sifting through it, doesn't have the skills to do it? What good, objective, evidence-based guidelines can we give them to help them get healthy, to help them reduce disease, to help them increase their health span so they can get more out of their life? That's what I'm most interested in. And I would say that I've struggled in this conversation to kind of really understand the science that's informing your position, other than the N=1 experience you've had and what you see in clinic. And I'm not saying that's not impactful. I believe your work is tremendously impactful. We're coming at this from two different areas. I'm coming at this from a public health recommendation, and I would like to know from you, which will help me kind of better understand the way you're thinking about all of this. What's something about nutrition that you've changed your mind on in the last couple of years, and why?
Well, tell me about the glycocalyx. And that's not to say that, I mean, most people don't know about it.
Well, I understand
most people don't know anything about
epithelial cells.
Oh, it's huge in everything, because every cell communicates based on it. And tell me about hepatogenous diabetes. Most people don't know about it. And so how did I come upon this? One is I did it. And the challenge is, you don't know whether you're going to get cancer or not, because cancer hits healthy people. You don't know whether or not you're going to get heart disease or not, because it happens. One of the leading symptoms of heart disease is actually sudden death.
Right, but it happens more to people with high blood pressure, obesity, high cholesterol.
Well,
That's
which is
the
a
point.
symptom of what?
Which is a symptom of poor cardiometabolic
No, it is
health.
not. It's inflammation. The cause of all disease is inflammation.
So how come when you lower inflammation, we don't see reduced events in trials?
You actually will, but you see, you're trying to measure it by science. Science is poor at measuring things.
This is like just between you and I and all the listeners.
Oh,
what I
yeah.
struggle with is that science has got it all wrong, but somehow you've worked it out.
Okay. I haven't worked it out for you.
But you're talking about
I'm
inflammation
working
like
out-
you have worked it out. Do
I'm
you
working out-
understand?
Oh, of course I have. And
So you
I'm
have worked
sharing
it out
in a
or you
way-
haven't?
I'm sharing my thoughts and ideas in a way that people go like, this guy's kind of crazy. I don't know about it. But I've been suffering all these drugs. My doctors keep on telling me to do this plant-based diet or Mediterranean diet or whatever it is. And I went carnivore, which is crazy. Now, again,
But it sounds very definitive, and then you throw your hands up in the air and say, it's just a story. And that is so confusing for the
Isn't it?
listener.
okay, so look at human beings are storytellers. That's who we are. Your observation and perception in your brain is a story you tell yourself. The power of the mind is actually, we are essentially God, because our brain is the storyteller of reality. You create me and I create you. We each create everything in existence that we live with based on our evolutionary DNA and epigenetics and all the stories we've been told. Okay? Have you ever tried a carnivore diet for 3 months? No. Most people haven't. And it's a hard one to believe. And I would tell you, don't do it.
I also haven't done a milkshake diet for 3 months.
Of course you haven't. Look, again, but we're here talking about a plant-based and an animal-based diet. Like, what are you thinking to do this with Simon and Robert? It's kind of crazy. And you're having a difficult time because, I mean, do you understand religion and God?
At a high level, I wouldn't say I'm a religious person.
Well, meaning that, I mean, I don't understand it, but I'm always working to understand it. You said most people don't have the skills. Everyone has the skill because everyone has the DNA of everything. That's how we're
The
built.
skill to have the nutritional literacy to make sense of evidence.
Be careful. Everyone has the skill. They may not yet have the knowledge.
Yeah, but I think
That's
you're
what
asking too much of a population to sift through all of this when they haven't been trained to and to make sense of it.
You don't
That's
need
what
to be
public
trained.
health recommendations are for.
Okay, it's government. I'm not here to be the government. I'm here to share ideas like you guys are.
What do you think about the government
I love the government.
and public health recommendations?
I question a lot of them. I disagree with a lot of them, but that's the beauty of why we're in this. We are individuals that are skilled and capable to do anything, but we believe we're not, or we are biased against other people, which is wrong.
I'm open to changing my mind. You haven't put forward any evidence that would warrant that. And I can say that I can show you examples of how I've changed my mind. So you mentioned dairy, right? In the last 5 or 6 years, my recommendations and understanding of dairy and dairy fats has changed a lot as evidence has evolved, and understanding that certain types of dairy like cheese and yogurt, fermented dairy in particular, actually improves cardiometabolic risk factors and outcomes.
Dairy is deadly.
Right. And why?
Because
it's comments like that.
For a baby.
You said
it's meant
fear.
for a baby.
You said fear is such a problem, and then you're coming out and saying
You're
dairy
right.
is
It's
deadly.
Okay, so
are you not
it's like
contributing
you
to
say-
the fear?
Wait, I thought you were promoted butter a little bit.
Okay, so
And cream.
okay,
I'm confused.
correct. Okay,
Totally confused.
So many people can't tolerate milk products. Okay, who you are, I don't know, but cream and butter are different because they're mostly fat. And what are they missing? Glycoproteins. The glycoproteins component of milk is highly antigenic for many people. I get a little bit of it, but it's tolerable, and I love the cream, and I love the butter. So I will tolerate some inflammation.
Do you think how you feel in the moment, because you mentioned this earlier, is necessarily indicative of long-term health outcomes? Because I can smoke a cigarette today, lose weight, feel good, but that's terrible for me long-term.
Well, that's what you believe.
Okay, so you believe smoking's good long-term.
That's what you believe. Look at the power of the mind is one of the most important things in all of this.
I'm trying to understand yours.
Well, that's why we're here together. But even nutrition, you sat and you looked at it and you said, I understand this.
Oh, no.
Of course not.
No.
It takes
I know. I realize there's a
time.
lot of things I don't know, and I hold my positions firmly but loosely. Let's say that. I'm willing to change my position. If you can put forward evidence that I believe is stronger than what I have, I'll change my view.
You're in your 20s?
30s, 38, nearly 40.
38, 40, and I'm doing nearly 70, all right? And what we believe at any one time in our life will change. I may be a vegan one day and you may be a carnivore. Can you guarantee that won't happen? No one can.
I cannot guarantee that, but what I can do is play probabilities. What is probable?
I'm not. Okay, look at it. Everything is possible. You're right. What's more likely or less likely? That's where we play the game. But this is a story to be told for people to go like, these two guys are crazy, or at least I might be, and I don't mind it.
I like you. Let me just, can I just put that down?
I really like you a lot.
your what you have to say and the company. We have very different views on this.
100%.
But when I look at you in the eyes, I literally am like, this is someone that I could hang out more with.
Yes.
Well, and I want everyone to know that's listening to all of this, that these two people are most amazing. And I've been watching and listening to their stuff, and I'm very impressed with their knowledge and their passion to help people. But the beauty is, this is why we come to a table to talk, because if we're just sitting here talking about, we agree on everything, I mean, that gets kind of boring.
Exactly.
People, I mean, we watch movies and read books and things that are stories that are conflicting. If you're not conflicted in life, you're not going to grow. Pain is the pusher to the power of creativity. Artists, you play guitar and you podcast. That means you're creative, right? And without, I mean, I'm conflicted by all of this sometimes.
What would it take for you to change your mind and to say, you know what, a carnivore diet worked for me, and in my lived experience, I've seen it with some patients, but maybe it's not the best thing to be recommending this at a population level or to people who are not presenting to you in your fertility clinic?
Have you ever heard the term, you are what you eat?
Of course.
Lions eat meat. Pigs, cows, and sheep eat mush. When you feed a lion and a wolf plants, they become domesticated dogs and cats. We are highly domesticated animals. We're addicted to plants. And the story is so powerful, we won't give them up. We won't even give up belief in that they're the very best. People are smoking marijuana. They're using all sorts of psilocybin, ayahuasca, and all these sort of drugs, and they're drinking alcohol. But the number one most addictive thing is actually a plant-based low animal fat diet. That is it. Might I change one day? I might, but lions lead and sheep.
But we're not lions.
Oh, we are.
I mean, people could be pointing to apes, great apes.
No, we are lions. We are killers. We are controllers. That's what this story is about. The lions want to lead the masses.
And why do you have a different view to the majority of anthropologists out there looking at the way our ancestors ate?
Well, my story is we came out of the trees to eat the grass. Eaters, not the grass. We learned to make weapons and hunt in packs. That's who we are. And we can control the masses by feeding them bread and beer, plants, because it affects their brains. They will listen to the plants, which is kind of a crazy story, but all organisms are living, are they not? All organisms want to do what? Live and reproduce. Are plants any different? They're no different.
No, they're part of the same evolutionary game.
They are really smart because they've learned to control the masses to be vegan, vegetarians, Mediterraneans. They've they've helped them control their seeds, helped them flourish in different DNA and epigenetic and outward appearances. Ultimately, when you eat the fatty meat, you have clear thinking. Now, this is my story. Don't believe me. Don't do it. Okay? But what if on a meat-centric diet, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, depression, suicide is on the rise? Why? I don't know. But I've heard and seen so many stories, and the stories are growing in the carnivore world. It's growing. They're anecdotes. They're stories. But let's compile all those stories and put it out there to the world to let them make the decision, not government. Because part of the government is industrial control, the worker bees. I don't want to be a worker bee. I want to be a lion, and I want to teach you to be a lion also, which I know you are, and a lioness, because we're all that. And this is the beauty of life. And look at fasting. 5 to 7 day fasting, at least a couple times a year, is really great for the mind. We know spiritual journeys are great. We know that reading and listening to ideas that are going to help us all, which we all have the capability, the DNA and the skills are there. I learned to fly an airplane, or, I snowboard, and we are all capable of everything. We need the stories to be told and accessed for everyone that they can change. I was saved by an LAPD officer once. When I was 14, he arrested me. And he said, in LA, Rampart District, and he gave me a choice. I can clean up my act or go to jail. And my ass was kicked to get out of the gang. And I changed my life because of someone that gave me an opportunity of a story that I didn't understand. And we're all listening and learning together. And I don't know any more than you. I don't know anything special than anyone, because ultimately every human being is so mightily intelligent, but they don't have the access to information. So the government shouldn't be telling everyone, go meatless. That's wrong. They shouldn't tell everyone to only eat meat either.
But they're not doing that. They're not telling everyone to go meatless.
Okay, there are people in government that create meatless days, or convincing more and more people to eat more plants and less meat.
But that's not telling people to eat meat.
Wait. The government and the public message, and it's public health, and what you're sharing is how we need to create a story that people can rely on for being healthy. Yet the story they're relying on is making them less healthy.
But that's in your view.
This is my opinion.
That's your opinion.
This is all my opinion. I'm not trying to usurp anyone else, but I'm just telling you my story, which I believe, because.
But it seems like you believe it. It goes back to this lion and ancestral component is a big part of your story, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I've had anthropologists on the show. It's a topic I'm very interested in. And, we've already spoken before about what our ancestors were doing does not necessarily speak to behaviors, traits that are conducive to longevity. It simply means that whatever they were doing was good enough and helped them get to an age to procreate. That's what evolution is really concerned with. What I would ask you is, if you're going to say ancestrally we ate a very high animal fat diet.
Raw meat.
Okay. My question to you is, are we going back 1,000 years, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, 2 million? Are we going to Africa? Are we going to Europe? Are we going to summer? Are we going to winter? What season? How are you identifying what the optimal human diet is, the single optimal human diet, or how much animal fat?
Well, I'd rather be a lion than a pig. Number one. Number two, anthropologists all argue about the same story too, of what we ate. Okay? I don't know that answer. I have no idea. But when I look at cave painting, it's like they're hunting. It makes more sense to me. but it's the story they tell too. They're no different than us. All scientists are making observations of their data, what they find, right? And then they're writing a story about it, so we all can sit and enjoy the story of humanity.
So why don't you guys finish up this little piece, if there's anything else you want to add to this, and I'm going to ask one final question to finish out this conversation, because it's been over 2 hours now, a fascinating 2 hours. And yeah, I'm going to finish it up with one last question. Either of you have anything else to say on this, though? Go ahead.
I think I'm pretty good.
Okay.
Ultimately, we're on the same mission with regards to improving public health, metabolic health being really front and center of that. We're coming at this from different angles. The way we're coming to our conclusions, the reason they're different is that we're looking to different evidence. And so what I see as high quality evidence, Dr. Kiltz doesn't, and what he sees as strong evidence, I do not. I think there is an issue of false equivalence that can occur, where you can think, okay, because these two people have different views, both views are equivalent. My view is that the data that I'm using to inform my views is stronger and less likely to be subject to bias. I'm not 100% certain, but I have greater certainty in the recommendations that I'm putting forward, again, are better for long-term cardiometabolic health, reducing the risk of dementia, various forms of cancer, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, all these chronic diseases that are affecting people far too early in their life, and helping the individual maximize their health span.
So anything else you want to say quickly before I ask the last question?
I don't care about public health. I care about human health, all humans around the globe. I think that's one of the most important things we need to focus on, all of us together. And thank you. And ultimately, we're all looking at the same thing with different opinions. All of us. That's the human brain. And so,
but are we looking at the same thing? Because it feels like to me you're not necessarily looking at the studies that I've looked at.
And you haven't looked at the studies or at least the carnivore world like I've looked at it and experienced it. I didn't believe it, but I was tired of suffering. But I didn't really suffer. I had some suffering younger, but it didn't really happen until I was older, in my 40s. That's when it all happened, and you're not there yet. And again, when you experience these things, you go like, whoa, why'd that happen? But ultimately, there's nothing false about anything we're saying. We're all saying what we believe to be true, because ultimately the brain looks at the data and we come up with an opinion of it, and we create a story to tell so we can help heal humanity, because that's what we're really here to do, is heal humanity and not create some public discourse. But maybe that's part of your job. I don't know what your day job is, but we're here to help more and more people in a way. And I have a different opinion about the data and the stories. I've learned that I need to spend more time on human beings rather than looking through all the data, which can be confusing. And we're all confused. Most people are confused. And so when they're confused, they're depressed, they're sick, they're anxious. What do you want to do? You want to eat and have a party, but maybe some meat.
Okay.
I would, and my final words on that I'd push back on is that I believe it is my duty as someone that is giving recommendations about nutrition to look at the evidence and say it's confusing, but it's my duty to actually get in there and understand why is it confusing, and then be able to explain it to the typical person out there who's just trying to go to the grocery and make healthy food choices.
And it's my passion to share a story that's going to toss it all on its head and change it. Because if we keep on sharing the same story, but we're getting the same thing, insanity will still ensue. We got to change it up.
And I'll push back a little bit on that, if I may, is that I think one of the areas where I think we're coming up against some disagreement here is that you seem to think that the dietary guidelines we have are failing, they haven't worked, right?
100%.
Okay. And I am of the view that it's more of an implementation problem and a food environment problem than it is the guidelines themselves, because the majority of Americans are not eating according to the guidelines. So I disagree that it's the guidelines problem. What I agree with is we're not making it easy for people to adhere to them because they live in a terrible food environment. And so regulation, the word I know that you don't like, if there's going to be regulation, it's around creating a food environment that makes it easy to eat in a way that science has proven is a healthy dietary pattern.
I don't think they've proven it.
Okay.
Well, I think short of proving it, we're far more certain that a particular theme or way of eating is conducive to better long-term health. And I think it's a little bit rich to blame those guidelines when the food environment, which as you mentioned before, is set up by large food companies, it's not set up in a way that makes it easy to adhere to these recommendations.
The government.
There's temptation everywhere. So I feel like you're blaming a set of guidelines, a set of evidence-based public health guidelines that people are simply not following. And it's not the individual's fault. This is not the individual's fault. I want to make that really clear. We're living in an environment that makes it terribly hard to be healthy. It makes it terribly hard to move our bodies. It makes it terribly hard to eat in a healthy way. And that if we're going to direct blame, I don't think it's at the science. I think the blame is to be directed at the government for the way that our food environment is set up.
Blame is yesterday. I want to inspire people for today and tomorrow. And have you ever had a beautiful, amazing ribeye steak, black and blue with salt and butter?
I used to eat a lot of meat.
Have you ever
in my
had
20s.
So fatty meat ribeye steak? Oh my God, it's heaven. And when you realize you can eat it with joy and know that it's the healthiest thing for you, that's what I think we should be looking at.
But people want to hear that. So that's why people are gravitating to you, because you're
gravitate to
charismatic
you.
and you're telling people that their favorite foods that are rich in butter and high in animal protein that they thought were unhealthy, all of a sudden they're healthy.
Prove it.
So people love that message.
People don't really want to eat salads, I think.
I love a good Caesar salad.
I love
Okay,
a good
look
salad
at that.
too, but most of the people, if they're having the choice at a restaurant, what would they rather? They're like ribeye steak versus like a light salad.
And again, my view is not that steak is bad. You can have steak in your dietary pattern. The exposure amount matters. and in order to determine what that is, you have to use science.
I'm a science project myself.
Okay, so how do you know how much red meat can be in someone's diet for it to not have a deleterious effect on their risk of cancer, colorectal cancer, which you mentioned before?
Okay, colorectal cancer and most disease, if you look at Otto Warburg's work, Thomas Seyfried's work, is basically a sugar disease. Sugars come from plants ferment in the gut, a done story. Again, we need to eat fat first. Keto is a fat diet, not a protein diet. Low carb is not true. High protein is not true. High fat. When you eat fat, it kills the microbes. It reduces inflammation. It supports the glycobiome, and your body wants fat. It's just like thriving for it. Women cannot reproduce without fat. They're dead. Okay? And so we are not talking about fat. We're talking about seed
women
plant oils
cannot reproduce without animal fat? Is that what you're saying?
without fat.
Okay, but earlier you said
look,
fat
look,
comes from
no,
animals and oils come from plants, so I'm
so
confused.
No. Fat on our bodies is animal fat. We are animals. We contain fat. Without it, you will die. And fat is the most amazing. Adipose tissue, I don't care where it is in the body, it contains every mineral, every vitamin, every building block of a baby.
But you can build adipose tissue without eating copious amounts of animal fat.
You're
conflating the two. You're saying that in order to get this
just
fat,
listen
that's
to my
helpful
story.
for...
You didn't have to listen to the story. Fat is made in the liver out of amino acids and simple sugars. That is it. And your body wants you to have fat so bad, you will eat whatever you can find because your brain has no idea that there's not going to be they're thinking famine or hibernation or gestation. We are used to eating one meal a week potentially. We do know that fasting is so powerful, but there's no fat on your body that's bad or causes a disease. Fat is not toxic. That's wrong.
Okay, I would like to ask last question. I know this is riveting, and I'm sure you have more to say.
I'm
But
just here.
No, I know we could probably go for 4 hours. But the last question, not quite specifically about nutrition science, but does your nutrition stance have anything to do with ethics or planetary health?
It's unethical to feed a human being an inappropriate diet that's going to cause disease, malnourishment, and many other diseases. That's unethical. We are animals, and all organisms eat something. And so am I ethical? You better believe I am, because I care about human beings and I care about this earth. And I'm not here to fight the fight of any of that stuff personally, but I do believe that an animal-centric and a regenerative agriculture, I think, is powerful and good. And that's my stance.
Great. Simon?
I think, first of all, you should be able to have a human nutrition conversation separate to ethics, which we seem to have done today, which is always good.
Yeah.
I think as a human and humanity in general, we have a responsibility to protect the world, not only for other animals, but for future humanity. And the way that we're currently growing food, and we've essentially turned Earth into a giant farm, is having incomprehensible consequences on natural ecosystems and is creating very real risks for future humans that will be on this planet. There's more humans in the future than have ever been born today. That's a fact. And so, I think part of us being in this story of evolution, which is a giant story, and we're probably right at the beginning of it, is paying it forward and, protecting humanity humans as a species, so that we have a habitable world in the future. And when you look at the research, which Dr. Kiltz might not agree with, we can have a much more biodiverse planet. We can have far less carbon emissions. We can have far less pollution, ocean acidification. If we shift diets away from so many calories from animal foods and having more calories from plant foods. And that's very consistent across the data. People can go to a website called Our World in Data, where there's some really great summaries of that information. Does that mean everyone needs to adopt a vegan diet? No. There can be tremendous benefits found in simply shifting to a more plant-based diet. And I think when you start to also incorporate planetary health into the conversation, and you could incorporate animal welfare if you wanted to, these make stronger arguments for people downshifting on animal foods. But I don't think it makes an argument that everyone should be vegan. I think that ultimately there's population recommendations, and certain individuals will go and follow it one way that feels best for them, but it might not feel best for everyone. So, whereas previously I might have taken a more firm position on that, I don't think I would today. I think there's a general theme, and then within that, choose your own adventure. But I do think, and certainly me as an individual here, I feel responsible for more than just my own health.
Great. Anything else you want to finish out before we close?
Well, I feel responsible for all of humanity, and working to do my very best to share a story that helps each and every individual heal. And if what we do helps them live longer, great. Live better, great. Because that's really what we want to do. And certainly the world is important for today and tomorrow, and anything we do together is important. And I think together is so important. We see the data differently. We analyze it differently. And again, whether it's specific data in a paper or it's just overall look at the world, where it's at and where it could go. The beauty is that we can sit down together and share this in a way that we're all learning together from each other. I appreciate that.
Great.
And honor you.
Well, thank you guys both for so much for coming on this show. I really enjoyed this. I could have kept going listening for hours, and I really appreciate you both coming here. I think you guys are both amazing.
Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ellen.
Dr.
Thanks,
Kiltz.
Simon. Appreciate it.
There you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and want to stay up to date with future episodes, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow on Apple or Spotify. Finally, thank you for showing up and the effort that you're making to take control of your health. I look forward to hanging out with you again in the next episode.